All right, good morning, everybody. And we are back in the book of Revelation, chapter 11. You can turn to if you're not there. Lord willing, we're going to finish up chapter 11 and jump into Revelation chapter 12, which would some call the most maybe confusing chapter of the entire Bible. So we'll hopefully, Lord willing, be able to jump in there. But I'm going to go back and just recap again. I'll go back to verse 7 to kind of cover what we went over last time to lead us right up. Because today, especially, I think you're going to see why context does matter and helps you understand things when we understand the context of what everything is saying. So Revelation, verse number 7 says, and when they have finished their testimony, remember it's talking about the two witnesses, the beast that rises from the bottomless pit will make war on them and conquer them and kill them. So the Antichrist kills the two witnesses at the end of the 3.5 years they were witnessing, and their dead bodies will lie in the street of that great city that symbolically is called Sodom and Egypt, where their Lord was crucified. For 3.5 days, from the peoples and tribes and languages and nations will gaze at their dead bodies and refuse to let them be placed in a tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and make merry and exchange presents, because these two prophets had been a torment to those who dwell on the earth. So they get killed, their bodies are laying there, they're disgraced, they're not burying them. People are starting a new holiday, they're so excited, they're dead. That's how much they hated the two witnesses and how much really they hated the truth, right? That's really what they hated. But after the 3.5 days, a breath of life from God entered them, and they stood up on their feet, and great fear fell on those who saw them. Even I'd probably be afraid, and I believe in the Lord, and that would probably catch me off guard, right? So after 3.5 days, look at that reminiscence again of Jesus' 3 days, right? The 3 days of 3 days is a reflection of what Jesus went through. He preached the gospel, suffered, died for it, and came back resurrected, and then is ascended, right? Then they heard a loud voice. Here's the ascension. They heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here. And they went up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies watched them. So they had their own rapture event here, right? Own rapture event for the witnesses. They disappear. And then, of course, look at that. And at that hour, the same time that's all happening, there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. Imagine the news that night. Hey, there's these dead bodies. Remember the two witnesses? They're up. They actually came back from the dead. That's not it. They also ascended to heaven. Also, while that happened, there was an earthquake, and 7,000 people died. Like, that's just absolute chaos. And the world's already been in chaos, by the way. And that's what happens. And it says the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. And it doesn't say, and they refused to repent, like a lot of the scriptures say in other places. So I said, that's a little bit of a hint here. Remember that they're in Jerusalem. And the two witnesses who were Jewish, right? Jewish men, we believe they were Moses and Elijah. They were preaching. And the whole goal of this of the tribulation is to wake up the Jews of Israel, right? Who are asleep now. The tribulation began to wake them up, right? And I believe this is the beginning of those Jews who maybe for 3.5 years were even annoyed with these two witnesses. They couldn't stand it. And they probably even said things like today, like, we don't believe in this Jesus guy, and they're twisting our Old Testament, they're twisting our scriptures. They probably said things like that. But then these Jews started to believe. I think this is the beginning of that spiritual regeneration that is promised in Romans chapter 11 that I went over last week. Then it says the second woe has passed. Behold, the third woe is soon to come. So that was the end of the second woe, which I said those woes, they lasted for chapters now. And now we're entering into the third and final woe, which is the seventh trumpet, which we did cover last week. Then the seventh angel blew his trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. And I talked about how the kingdom of the world, that means the worldly system, the one that Satan runs, all the worldly power structures that we see today that is currently thriving. Currently, we live under the kingdom of the world. It's Satan's kingdom, and that's why the governments and everybody operates the way they do, right? So Christ is not ruling over, although he's over everything and allowing things to play out. He's not ruling, but this marks that transition, the thing that we've all been promised, that the Lord's going to reign forever and ever. And this seventh trumpet signals it, even though we're only halfway through the book, which is an interesting thing, and I'll kind of talk about that here. And now we're going to pick up where we left off in verse number 16. I'll do 16 and 17 because they kind of bleed together here. And the 24 elders who sit on their thrones before God fell on their faces and worshiped God, saying, we give thanks to you, Lord God Almighty, who is and who was, for you have taken your great power and begun to reign. All right, so the 24 elders. Remember in Revelation 4, a couple of chapters back, in verse 4, we learned about these 24 elders. Remember in chapter 4, verse 4, it said, around the throne were 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones were 24 elders, clothed in white garments with golden crowns on their heads. So these are the same ones we saw before. And before, remember, I had determined that they're probably representative of all the people of God, the redeemed believers of God, symbolized by maybe the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles making up all believers through all time. And they're in heaven worshiping God. They've been doing that before. It talks about how they sit on their thrones before God. So that ties them with those chapter 4, letting us know it's the same elders. And notice they're already in heaven enthroned and all this stuff's going on. So all this chaos going on in the earth, and here are the elders again. More signs that the church is in heaven. We would be included in these elders here. We are not on the earth during all of this going on, which is really interesting to note as well. It also connects to the promises that we got. Remember back in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12, when it said, if we endure, we will also reign with him. This is the evidence of that promise being true. And of course, Daniel in chapter 7 saw this kind of throne language, saw this same kind of thing. He said, as I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. And it goes on to say, so this is exactly, again, what Daniel has seen. And they fall on their faces. So you can see, again, although they're on thrones, which is a sign of, high rank, they're on their faces, a sign of humility, right? It's like bowing down on your face, full sign of reverence and humility. Ezekiel acted like this. He fell on his face. There's other places in Scripture, falling on your face out of reverence. So isn't it interesting? Although they're crowned and enthroned, these elders are bowing. They're showing deep humility, right? Why are they worshiping now, right? That's the question. Why are they going into the set of worship? Well, it's all about the fact that was just proclaimed. Christ now reigns over all. Christ is reigning. So they're celebrating this. And it's really awesome to see that they're celebrating not things that are done personally for them. Sometimes we worship God only when he does something great, like, oh, thank you, Lord, for answering our prayers. But here it's showing you should worship him about because who he is and when his promises are fulfilled. Of course, we're all affected by him taking charge, right, and becoming the king over all the earth. But it's worshiping about who he is, what is done, worshiping his plan, and how great his plan is. And notice they're the closest ones to the throne, and they're bowing, right? So true understanding of God leads to greater humility, not pride, right? The world works backwards. Our world is upside down. We pretty much know that. The higher up you get, the more full of pride in our world you seem to get. You seem to think you're more important than other people. And then you try to get up here so you can become more important and have more clout over people. It's the opposite with God. The closer you get, then the more humility you get because you realize everything you have is because of God. And you give it all to God. So that's what's going on here. True worship, people who truly love God will be full of humility, right? Because pride is the root of all evil. Pride's the root of all of our sin. And that continued on. What are they saying? They say, we give thanks to you, Lord God Almighty, who is and who was, for you have taken your great power and begun to reign. So look at that, saying we give thanks. So worship, how does worship begin? With thanks and gratitude. That's where our worship should come from. That's how it is for them. Again, not for personal blessings, but because of God's sovereign action in history. That's what they are thanking him for. Not what God has done for them, but what he's doing for the world. They're just praising God. And notice there's something interesting here. Look what it says, who is and who was. We've seen that language before. Hold your finger where you're at and go back to chapter 1 of Revelation. Go to Revelation 1, and we're going to look at the 8th verse of this entire book. Revelation 1, verse number 8. And here's what it says. It's God talking, right? I am the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord God, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty. Look, Lord God Almighty, there it was, who is and who was and who is to come. But there's something different about this verse. What is missing? There's something missing that doesn't follow the pattern of the first part. Did you notice? Who is and who was and who is to come. But it's not listed there. Why would that be omitted? Why is that not listed? Well, because who is to come is talking about the future. What this is alerting us is it's no longer who is to come. It's who has come presently. The future has now become the present. All those times when we say who is, who was, who is, and who is to come, that's because we're talking about the future. This is a sign, just like it said, that the Lord has now come to reign. So that is now present. It's no longer who is to come, it's who has come now. So God's reign is no longer future, it's breaking into the present moment. And that's another sign of that right there, right? He's actively asserting his power. It says, for you have taken your great power. You have taken your great power. What does that mean? His power's always been there. He could have crushed the enemy a long time ago whenever he wanted. He could crush him today if he wanted to. But God's timing is perfect. It was planned out perfectly, right? So he's taken his great power. He's going to use all of his power and exercise it openly now, right? But he could have done the whole time because it was the time to do it. And it says that you have begun to reign. And this is the key declaration here. He's always been reigning, of course. He's still reigning today, but it's now going to be physically manifested, right? When we think about reigning, what his disciples thought when they thought about the Messiah coming and reigning, they thought about this political leader ruling on earth. That is going to happen. And that's what this is finally talking about. They were just way early on that, right? They were way early on that. It's essentially talking about the imminent establishment of Christ's millennial kingdom, right? It's talking about the 1,000-year millennial kingdom, which is really interesting again because, wait a minute, we're in chapter 11. There's 22 chapters in this book, so we're halfway there, and it's talking about it's already over. But we didn't even get to some of those other crazy parts you know about, right? We didn't even get to the mark of the beast and him getting killed and coming back from the dead. So how does that play in, right? Well, it kind of reminds me of when you start a military campaign. It doesn't usually happen that day. You usually don't go in and you don't usually conquer that day. You begin to go through a process. So this process is going to be about a 3.5-year process. But although it's been initiated, they see it as already here. It kind of reminds me of I used to play sports. I'm a sports guy, right? So in a basketball game, say we were at a high school basketball game and our team was up 28 and there's 3.5 minutes left in the game. Some people will start clapping, some people cheering, some people will say we won. And people in the moment might say, and you'll hear sometimes, hey, we didn't win yet, right? We didn't win yet. There's still time on the clock. We didn't win yet. And everybody looks around and goes, yeah, but we won already, right? We all won. And you understand at some point in a game, that's why people clear out of the stands early, right? Because the game's already over. Everybody knows who won. That's what's going on here. It's game's over. Game's over. I won. Christ won, right? Jesus wins. It's over. He's coming now, and it's going to be a 3.5-year process, maybe slightly longer, but it's going to be this whole process here, and it's begun now. It's over, and there's nobody stopping it. Basically, this is unstoppable. It's like the team up 100 points in the fourth quarter. There's no way it's going to be stopped. Although there's still time on the clock, it's over. Game's over. That's what is being said, essentially, right here. And it's been talked about all throughout the Bible. In Psalm 99, first verse, the Lord reigns, let the peoples tremble, it says, right? So it's talking about this time, right? Because what was happening right before this? People were trembling in fear because God is reigning. God's about to reign. He's about to bring that, and he reigns, and the people tremble. This was spoken all the way back in Exodus. Did you know Exodus chapter 15, the 18th verse says, the Lord will reign forever and ever? And that's way back in the days of Moses, circa 1446 BC. And that was predicted back then, that prophecy, and it's going to be fulfilled. And that's what's happening right here. The long-awaited promises are finally fulfilled. That's why people are excited, and we're going to be very excited. We'll be here cheering and singing. That's us, by the way. That's us saying this kind of stuff. We're going to be cheering and excited that it's happening, right? Then we go into verse number 18. It's going to give us more context here. The nations raged, but your wrath came, and the time for the dead to be judged, and for rewarding your servants, the prophets and saints, and those who fear your name, both small and great, and for destroying the destroyers of the earth. The nations raged. What does that mean? Well, it's talking about the rebellion of humanity against God, right? All the nations. Today, the nations are raging. Just go on TV, turn on the news. The nations are raging. What are they trying to do? They're trying to do their own plan without God, take over the world in some kind of way, fashion, or form in their own way. They're trying to reign now over certain parts of the land. That's what's happening. And they're raging, right? But at a deeper level, these are the ones that go against. What it's really talking about, these are the ones that go against, like the Antichrist we're going to talk about, right? Or Pharaoh in the past. Those were kingdoms that raged against God, right? They tried to act in the place of God, right? They defy him. They have open resistance, actively oppose God. Go to Psalm chapter 2. This one pretty much sums it up. Again, the Psalms are written about 1,000 years before Christ was born. So think about how old this is and then what's happening here in Revelation. This prediction is coming true. Psalm chapter 2. Psalm chapter 2, I'm just going to read the first 5 verses. I've read them before in here, I think maybe even last week. Psalm 2. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves again, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury. So there it is. What Psalm 2 talked about, what you read before, you probably read that before, it's talking about this moment, right? Talking about all those times, all the kings of the earth raged against God, and what he's doing and his plan, right? And God is going to come and put an end to it. That's what's happening, right? But your wrath came, it says. Isn't that interesting? They rage, difference between human rage and God's, not rage, but wrath. Because his wrath is righteous. He doesn't get mad for the wrong reasons. He gets mad for all the right reasons. So this is in contrast to the humans raging and God's wrath, right? So this is God's response. It's not some wild, uncontrolled, like fury and wrath like we see with humans either. It's holy, it's just, and it's timed. If you notice, it's timed, it's calculated, it's poured out for this time. Everything is calculated, and judgment has just finally arrived. It's finally the time for it. It also says it's time for the dead to be judged. Notice this is talking again, because what do we just say? It's over. The game's over. So they're talking like everything is done. We're kind of getting a fast-forward look, almost a prophetic look, at now we're looking at things like the great white throne judgment are going to pop up, things at the end. It's talking about how everything's over. The time for the dead to be judged, pointing to the great white throne judgment. Because at the end, and this is even kind of talking about the end of the kingdom, the end of the 1,000-year kingdom, when he's going to judge people. He'll judge people in the beginning of his kingdom and at the end of his kingdom. And then it says, for rewarding your servants. So it says, hey, by the way, it's not all about judgment. It's about justice, right? Judgment and rewards. Because the Lord said if you followed him and you did his works, you'd be rewarded for that. So there'll be judgment given and there'll be rewards given. So there is honor for his servants, right? To his servants. And notice how it lists the servants. Really interesting, because it always does things for a reason. The prophets and saints and those who fear your name. 3 different groups of people. That's a weird way to put it. Why does it say that? The prophets, well, those, of course, are the ones who proclaim God's truth boldly, a lot of times in the face of opposition, a lot of times in the face of death. These are what we think of, the mighty prophets. Some people will say, I'm not like the people in the Bible, right? You think of people like Elijah and Moses, right? The bold prophets, right? So you have them. Then you have the saints. The saints are all believers, right? That's us. Anybody who outwardly claims to be a saint, right? The gathering, right now, we're at the gathering of the saints, right? The body of believers. And then you have those who fear your name. Fearing a name is anybody who truly honors God. It's an inward thing. So kind of you're seeing all effects, because then what it's going to say is both small and great, right? It's grouping all that together. Basically it's saying, doesn't matter if you're a big, bold prophet of the Bible like Moses and Elijah. Doesn't matter if you're a saint today out in the open that people see in the modern day. Or it doesn't even matter if you're one of those quiet that nobody even knows. It's inwardly. So there's an inwardness, a whole. It doesn't matter if you're small, great, a leader, just a common, quiet church mouse kind of a believer that just stays quiet. As long as you love and fear God, it's saying both small and great, no matter what, will be honored by the Lord. There will be no partiality, right? Everybody will be rewarded for what they did, according to what they did, and there will be no partiality. Everybody's included. The unknown believer and the well-known leader of the Bible will all be rewarded. Everybody's seen and rewarded accordingly, which is awesome, right? And then it ends, and for destroying the destroyers of the earth. So that's full justice is complete, right? He's going to judge those who didn't believe. He's going to reward those of us who had faith in him and believed. And then he's going to destroy the destroyers of the earth. How is that different than the other ones he's judging? Well, these are ones that are intentionally trying, those that are leading wicked systems, political systems with satanic influence, essentially. Those that are clearly pushing a satanic agenda. He's talking about destroying those destroyers. So those who are the destroyers end up being destroyed. See how it's backwards. They were the destroyers. Now they're the ones being destroyed by God. God becomes their destroyer. So it's poetic justice, right? And then moral balance is restored, because nobody gets away from pushing against God in this world, right? Everybody's going to pay for what they've done if they've opposed the Lord, right? Isaiah talked about this. Isaiah 26, verse 21. For behold, the Lord is coming out from his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity, and the earth will disclose the blood shed on it and will no more cover its slain. It's been talked about from the beginning, and this is what it's talking about. Again, it's kind of pivoting. It's assuming God already won. It's the end of the world. His kingdom's come. Now it's time to judge those who are opposed to his kingdom, welcome and reward those who stood strong to his kingdom. It's looking forward to the end because they're already considering the game's over. Christ is now reigning. And it reminds, again, human rebellion has a limit. It's hard for our minds, especially in this world, especially with non-believers. They have a really hard time, like, how will this ever be good, right? And with humans, it wouldn't be. There wouldn't be no hope. Wouldn't matter who you elected. Wouldn't matter what kind of political party you started to try to do this. It just wouldn't work without Christ, right? Christ is the only one that's going to bring peace and everything on earth, right? Verse number 19, to end this chapter, it says, Then God's temple in heaven was opened, and the ark of his covenant was seen within his temple. There were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and heavy hail. So interesting scene here. We have the 24 elders falling down. They're worshiping. They're singing these praises, which we're part of that group. And then God's temple is open. So now it goes from what was happening on the earth with the killing of the witnesses and the earthquakes. Now we've been looking at the heavenly things going on. And while there's worship in heaven, God opens his temple. It's the temple in heaven. It's not the temple on the Temple Mount down in Jerusalem, right? This is a heavenly thing. This is another reminder, by the way, that this is always a shadow of a greater reality. Everything we do down here to worship God and honor God is a shadow of the greater reality. This is God's true dwelling place, and he's revealing it to his people here. He's opening up his temple. Again, remember, the Ark of the Covenant was the most concealed, precious thing where God's presence was at, hidden in the Holy of Holies, and only the high priest of Israel could go in there one day a year and see it, right? There's no light in there, only God's light. So this is a pretty powerful thing. Now God's making this even in heaven open. Just like the veil was torn, right? We had access through Christ. You're seeing that here in the heavenly temple. And why is he showing us the Ark of the Covenant? By the way, I don't think this is the Ark of the Covenant on the earth. I don't think it got swallowed up when the Babylonians came. I don't think this is saying that God raptured the Ark of the Covenant into heaven. I don't think that's what it's saying. This is the true Ark of the Covenant that the Ark of the Covenant on earth was modeled after. And the one down here was either melted down or hidden, probably hidden somewhere. But this is the actual one in heaven that was modeled after, where God's presence truly is. So he's showing us his presence. What is the Ark of the Covenant? Covenant means promise. He's reminding us of his promises and he's fulfilling them. Saying all those things, the Ark of the Covenant, all this stands for, going all the way back to the days of Moses, what I promised Israel, the Messiah, and all the Gentiles who believed, all that stuff is coming to be. All those promises, he's showing us his faithfulness, right? And that this all connects. And we're going to see again, it also connects, remember, to where was this kept in? Israel, right? It's connecting to God's promises to Israel. He's waking them up. Remember, like I said, we just had some Jews previously to this wake up down on earth, say, wow, I just saw them ascend. The regeneration is starting to happen. So there's a lot of his promises, and he's pivoting back to he's going to fulfill everything he ever said in the law will be completely fulfilled. Every promise he's ever made, right? And it says, then there were flashes of lightning, which of course, divine power, rumblings, that's impending movement. You hear rumblings, right? Something's coming. Peals of thunder, and an earthquake, right? So there's an earthquake before this and another earthquake, it says. Heavy hail is judgment from heaven, so you can see God is acting. This is the same language in Exodus again. There's another shout out to Exodus chapter 19. Verse 16, on the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Isn't that interesting? So that all the people came in the camp trembled. And what do we just have? We just had a trumpet blast and that same kind of thing. Lightning, rumblings, thunder, all that kind of thing. Just like Ezekiel saw storm imagery. When God's presence shows up, there's a lot of storm imagery going on. So God's presence, God is acting, is what he's telling us here. And then it pivots into chapter 12. And this scene in chapter 12 is going to be a continuation of what we were talking about. Chapter 12 is very hard to understand in itself. But then when you disconnect it from what we just talked about and what it's about, it's really hard to understand. But I think because of how we're reading it in context, it's going to make a little bit more sense to you. So just think of it right now. There's two witnesses, right? They were preaching in Jerusalem, Jewish witnesses, and they were just killed. There's a lot going on. They were just killed in Jerusalem because of it. They were resurrected. And now they're saying in heaven that God is about to reign. So something is happening where God's about to reign, and the Jews are beginning to wake up. And as the Jews begin to wake up, Satan starts to get stirred to action because he realized this is really the end of the plan, right? So I think what we're about to see, I just want you to have that in mind. Everything that's happening is what we're going to talk about here. It's the cosmic story of Satan and the Messiah and the seeds at war. It's going to make more sense here. So here's verse number 1. Let's just dive right into it. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. So a great sign appeared in heaven. Again, remember, Revelation is talking about real things that will come, real things that happen. But when it says it's a sign not to be taken literally. I don't think there's going to be some woman floating in the sky in the end times. I don't think that's what this means at all. We're going to break it down. We're going to use the Bible. Remember, Scripture can help us understand Scripture. So it's a great sign, something really significant, right? Appeared in heaven. So there's a spiritual aspect to this. And basically, what we're going to see here is a shift in Revelation. We've been watching it do chronological judgments, chronological movements, right? And now what we're going to do in this chapter, why it's so hard to understand, is we're going to kind of tell what's continuing, what's going to take place. But it's kind of also a pause and a deep look at the behind-the-scenes conflict from the beginning until the end of time, from Genesis to Revelation. It's going to paint the picture that this war has been going on from the beginning, and now it's really manifesting in its final stage. We're going to see how much of a loop pattern this has been, but that's what it's going to shift to talk about, this theological conflict between God and Satan, right? And the seed of the woman. So here it says, in the sign was a woman clothed with the sun. So the woman is symbolic again here, and she's been interpreted in several ways. And from my perspective, remember, the Bible is true multiple. It's not always like this or that. It can be this and that simultaneously, right? Now, I do believe we're going to get to it. I do believe the ultimate fulfillment of this is Israel. But there's a couple different people this woman's said to be. She could be Eve. Some people think she's Eve giving birth, right? Some people think it's Mary, talking about Mary giving birth to Jesus. Some people say Rachel, maybe. It could be Rachel. Some people say it's the church. And then, like I said, the nation of Israel. I believe all of those at some point, and I'll explain how they do come into play in this cosmic story. But I believe what it's talking about right here, remember what's just happened and what's about to happen, it's really focusing on this woman being Israel. Why do I say that? Because in verse number 5, we'll get to it, but she's going to give birth to the Messiah, which is why I shut down when people try to say, well, this is the church. The church didn't give birth to Jesus, right? It's like, that's backwards. So you could kind of eliminate that right out the gate there. But the imagery of the sun, that's God's glory, right? We often see that. She's clothed with the sun. So that makes more sense to be Israel, right? Set apart by God, right? Chosen by God, set apart by God in glory. And it says then, with the moon under her feet. Now remember, the moon's used for times and seasons. There's also other references again to Israel, I'll point out. So it might be saying that she's elevated above creation, positioned in a place of honor, above all times, throughout all times and seasons. God has favored Israel in the good and the bad, right? We're going to see that. It says, on her head, a crown of 12 stars. This crown is important. Remember, I talk about this a lot. There's different kinds of crowns. What kind of crown is this? Stephanos. This is that victory crown we talk about, that victor's crown. So again, this is getting victory from God. Our victory comes from God, and you're seeing that victor's crown. Again, I believe this points to Israel because they have the victory through the Messiah. And again, I'm not saying that all Jews are saved, right? You have to believe in Christ. That's why Israel's, they reject Christ right now. But they are favored by God to bring through the Messiah. But if you go to Genesis chapter 37, there's more proof of what this is saying and backing up what I'm telling you right here. This is where we really get our evidence, because you can't just make these claims like I'm making and say that's what it means without some kind of proof. So I want you to go to Genesis chapter 37. Look at verse number 9, because we have to interpret Scripture with Scripture, especially the book of Revelation. That's the only way to understand it. Or you'll get all kind of weird things like the church. This is the church, right? Because it sounds like it could be a good thing because, we're the bride and we're this woman and we're the church. Doesn't make any sense to give birth to the Messiah. Genesis 37, this is going to make a lot more sense maybe. Verse number 9. We're talking about Joseph's dream he had. Remember Joseph's dream? Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brother and said, behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? So isn't that interesting? Look at verse number 9. It said, sun, moon, and 11 stars. Well, that's different because ours does say sun, moon, and 12 stars. That's different. But wait, Joseph's telling this dream, and he's going to be bowed down. So he's a star. That would be the 12th star. So in this dream, you have the sun, the moon, and 12 stars. This is just like Joseph's dream that he saw, right? The same thing. And in that dream, the sun was Jacob. The sun was Israel, Jacob, right? That's his father. The moon, some people debate and say, well, it would be Leah because Rachel's dead. But symbolically, this is all symbolically. I think it was symbolic of Rachel. That's where I think Rachel really does come into play because Rachel in Jeremiah chapter 31 is kind of symbolically referenced. Go to Jeremiah chapter 31, actually, because we'll come to that in a little bit too. Jeremiah chapter 31. And again, this stuff, if it's Leah or Rachel, that doesn't really matter in this dream that she had. But I do believe the dream is symbolically referring to Rachel, even though Rachel's been gone for a while. Because look at Jeremiah chapter 31 and go to verse 15. And here's what mine says. Thus says the Lord, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. Rachel is. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are no more. Thus says the Lord, keep your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for there is a reward for your work, declares the Lord. And they shall come back from the land of the enemy. There is hope for your future, declares the Lord, and your children shall come back to their own country. That's pretty clearly talking about Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel. Who is their mother? Symbolically, Rachel, right? So you have that symbolic language of Rachel. That's why I believe in the dream it was even Rachel as the symbolic mother here. And also, that's really important because what is Rachel doing in that scene right there? She is weeping. She is in sorrow. She is in agony. The woman in this that we're about to read about is in agony. She is in pain. So it even matches that pattern. You're going to be able to see this, what we're about to see here. There's so many things in the Bible that are going to relate to this story. It's saying so many things at once. You have Rachel weeping in sorrow, just like the woman here in Revelation 12. The 12 stars, of course, being the 12 tribes of Israel. The woman is Israel as a whole. Jacob, Rachel, all the 12 tribes. It's symbolizing everything because Jacob, the son of the sun, moon, and stars, the symbolism of the sun is Jacob, is Israel himself, the person, right? There's more proof that the woman is Israel here because I won't read it all, but in Ezekiel chapter 16, God clothes Israel. He talks about Israel being naked and he clothes Israel. And this woman is talking about being clothed with the sun, right? So you can see that same clothing language that God used in Ezekiel 16, right? We also see Jeremiah 31. We were just there. Look in Jeremiah 31 if you still have it open. If you don't, go back to it. Jeremiah 31. Remember we just read about, there's a sound in Ramah. Rachel's weeping for her children, symbolizing Israel. God says they'll be brought back, right? She's weeping. And later on in verse number 36, look at this. That same chapter, Jeremiah 31, verse 36. Look what this says. Thus says the Lord who gives the sun for light by day and the fixed order of the moon and the stars for light by night, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. If this fixed order departs from before me, declares the Lord, then shall the offspring of Israel cease from being a nation before me forever. So by the way, hold on to that one. That's a really handy verse for today's time, right? Because what's going on with Israel. But Jeremiah 31 verse 36 basically says, hey, God's basically saying, you see the sun, you see the moon, you see all those stars up there? Once they disappear, then I no longer love Israel as a nation. Then I give them up. When I give them up, when I give up the moon, the sun, and the stars. So every time you go outside and you see the sun, the moon, and the stars up in the sky, you can be rest assured that God still loves the offspring of Israel, right? And that they have not stopped being a nation from before him, right? That's why they're back around today, even though they don't always make the right choices, perhaps. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. We're not perfect, they're not perfect. But God is going to restore them. And here's the promise from that same chapter where Rachel was weeping for her children, right? So you can see that tied in. And again, this is a precursor. This right here, Jeremiah 31, 36, is basically what Romans 11 kind of borrows off of. Romans 11, remember in verse 1, Paul writes, I ask then, has God rejected his people? By no means, for I myself am an Israelite. So Paul starts out that chapter like, did God reject Israel? No. And he could probably even say, go read Jeremiah 31. There's the sun, the moon, and the stars. God said as long as they're there, he never gave up Israel. I know they're apostate. I know they've been scattered, right? People are saying that all throughout, and now they're gathered back. Because God says as long as the sun, moon, and the stars, he still had this plan, which is what he's fulfilling here, which is what this is all tied to here, right? There's more of this in Psalm 89. I'll read this to you for time. Psalm 89, verses 35 through 37 says, once for all I have sworn by my holiness, I will not lie to David. His offspring shall endure forever. His throne as long as the sun before me. Like the moon, it shall be established forever, a faithful witness in the skies. So did you know the sun and the moon also has another point? You can remember another thing, that when you see the sun and the moon, that David's offspring will endure forever. His throne will last as long as the sun before him. It's pointing to Christ, but that he will rule, and the plan is upholding, right? So you can see this. This right here, the sun, the moon, and the stars, is reminiscent of the Old Testament language. God's keeping his covenant promise to Israel. He's about to wake them up completely, just like he said he would, right? So you're seeing that going on here. Israel's central focus is coming back, right? And understanding this verse, this is why people have trouble with understanding Revelation chapter 12. This verse of the whole chapter is because you have to go back to Genesis and throughout the entire Bible and follow the chronological story. And it's a remix of everything that has been taking place. Let's do another verse, at least one more here. This woman here, she was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains in the agony of giving birth. So here it is. She was pregnant, right? She's carrying a child. Like I said, later on, we're going to find out she's carrying the messianic line, who we know is Jesus Christ. That's who that is, right? So you're seeing more of that. She's pregnant, and which shows, again, expectation is close. The promise is nearing its fulfillment, right? Just like a birth, a promise of a baby being born. It nears its fulfillment. It gets a little more intense at the end, right? Pregnancy gets a little more intense. The pain gets a little bit more intense at the end. That's what happens. So for Israel, as the promise of the Messiah coming back, because remember, the Messiah has come, but the Messiah is coming back again, and he will be coming for Israel this time. They'll be awake and ready for it. So the coming of their Messiah it's going to be a little stressful. The Antichrist is going to turn on them, right? Although Christ is ruling forever and ever, currently, it's a 3.5-year process, right? According to the Bible's timeline. So it's going to be stressful. They're going to have birth pains. And this is a throwback, you could say, to Mary giving birth to Christ. You can definitely see the birth pains that Mary had as she was giving birth to Christ. You could see that here. So Mary can be represented in this way, but that's not the ultimate fulfillment of what it's actually talking about. Again, because of the context we have of what's going on with the witnesses and what's going to come later. It also says she was crying out in birth pains. Crying out in birth pains. Can anybody else, what area of the Bible, is there any area of the Bible you can think of about birth pains? Anybody know any verses about birth pains or anything like that? Where that in the Bible you can find any? Genesis, I heard it. It's Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3. Go to Genesis chapter 3. All the way on the other side of your Bible. You're in the back of your Bible. Go to the front of your Bible. This is what the God's doing. He's actually, again, there's a throwback here. What's going on right here? Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3, verse 14. The Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. Now look at this. I will put enmity between you and the woman. He's talking to Satan, right? And between your offspring and her offspring. That's the Jewish people and all the people who believe in God then. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. To the woman he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Isn't that interesting? So the first time you hear about child pain, births of child pain, you have to go back to Genesis chapter 3 to learn about who? You got to learn about Eve. So it does symbolize Eve in the beginning, who had to give birth, right? So the Messiah comes. She had to give birth to Seth, actually. Seth is a line of that pain that came after Cain was killed, right? Seth is the his name means appointed. She had to give birth, and she gave birth to this line of the Messiah. So she is the beginning of the line, right? Eve, the mother of all creation, the Bible says. So Eve's represented here. Of course, Rachel's represented. She's crying later. Mary is represented because she gave birth and pain to the actual Messiah. And now you're having Israel, right? Israel, the representative of Israel. So you're seeing, but it's a throwback all the way to chapter 3. Why would verses 1 and 2 of Revelation, and actually even, I'm going to read 3 right now. We're going to stay in verse 2, but look at verse 3 for context. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. So as the woman shows up, there's also this dragon, this serpent, this dragon. So you're seeing what's happening here is it's throwing back to the cosmological war that began in Genesis 3. This is where the spiritual war began, right? Where the promise of the Messiah came. It's going back to the promise of the Messiah. That when the Messiah would come, Satan's seed, which will be the Antichrist, and all those evil leaders that have been run by Satan, right? They will war against Christ and his people, right? That was prophesied back then. So this is a throwback saying everything that was said in Genesis 3 is playing out, and it's coming to its ultimate fulfillment. These will be the last birth pains you see before the birth of the kingdom. And notice there's 5 elements that are connected. You can connect from Genesis 3 in the garden story to Revelation 12. Number 1, a woman and a serpent. Look at that, Eve and the serpent. You can see that in the story, right? Right here, right now. Enmity between the woman and the serpent. They're going to fight. They're going to be at war. This whole scene we're going to read in Revelation 12 is a war between this woman, her baby, and the serpent, this dragon, right? There's going to be conflict between her offspring and the serpent and the dragon. That happens right here. Conflict, when I say your offspring is going to fight with his offspring, what happens, we're going to read, as the offspring comes, he's after the offspring. He's after that, right? Childbirth, it mentions childbirth. That's what's happening right here. And the woman said to Eve, God said, will experience birth pains, which is exactly what we're reading here in verse number 2. So you can see the connection, that this is the ending of the beginning. The end ends exactly how the beginning began, because everything is a repeat. Everything is a pattern. To understand the end, you must understand the beginning. Micah chapter 4, I'll read this for you for time's sake. Micah chapter 4 talks about this. Verse number 10. Writhe and groan, O daughter of Zion, like a woman in labor. From now you shall go out from the city and dwell in the open country. You shall go to Babylon. There you shall be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies. That was Israel that went to Babylon. You hear the birth pains there in Micah. You can tie it right there to Israel. Birth pains mean intense struggle, right? There's going to be suffering. Remember, there's going to be a lot of suffering here for Israel. And it says the agony of giving birth. There's a cost of bringing forth God's redemptive plan into the world. When you do that, there's pain associated with it, the way the world works today. And that pain, though, is always purposeful, right? We say that even the pain we go through, even the trials we go through, it builds our character, brings us closer to God. We can be a good example to others around us. Our good works point to Christ, right? But also pain, as we see in here, and we see in pregnancies, pain is needed, and life and deliverance comes from that. So this is that pattern. There's pain now, but we know from the pattern that's happened at the beginning that from the pain will come life and deliverance. And that's what this is a sign of. This whole chapter, we're going to keep going deeper on it, but this whole chapter is pointing out that this is a reference to what's been started is going to end and is coming to fruition. And the war is going to get intense. What we're going to see is this dragon and the offspring and this woman, they're going to go to war, and that's what it's going to expand upon, this war that's taking place. And why is this war taking place? Because Christ is finally taking action. So Satan's kicking and screaming. It's going to be the one last spiritual war before Christ fully reigns. Isaiah 66 has an awesome prophecy about Israel being born as a nation in just one day. I don't know if you ever read it before. It's on Isaiah 66, verse 7 and 8. I'll read this. Isaiah 66, verse 7. Before she was in labor, she gave birth. Before her pain came upon her, she delivered a son. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall a land be born in one day? Shall a nation be brought forth in one moment? For as soon as Zion was in labor, she brought forth her children. That verse right there in Isaiah was talking again about Israel being born in a day, which you do go back. I know it's under crazy circumstances, but if you go back to the 1940s and look, Israel came, it was born out of nowhere. People never thought Israel would come back, but through God's plans, he allowed humanity to work out so that it would come back because his promises would be fulfilled. Micah chapter 5 talks more about all about the coming ruler of Israel and the woman in pain, going to come with labor. So it's been said over and over throughout the Old Testament, right? So you could say it has to do with Eve, it has to do with Mary, it even has to do with Rachel. It has nothing to do really with the church because the church doesn't give birth to any babies, right? There's nowhere in Scripture for that. But you can see the ultimate message throughout Old Testament as we looked is this is Israel, because again it's pivoting. The plan is pivoting to wake up Israel, and that's the final piece, which again is why Satan hates Israel. If he could wipe out all the Jews today, by the way, he would actually wipe out God's plan. How? Because Christ saved us. How does that wipe it out? Because God's promises would not be fulfilled because he did promise that he would wake them up in the end. So that's what this war is going to be about. You're going to read in Revelation 12. It's going to make a lot more sense. It's not just some random, wacky thing about dragons eating babies and all kinds of weird stuff, although it sounds like that. But when you sort through the dragons trying to eat a baby, it makes sense, as weird as that sounds. So does anybody have any, I'll just stop here because we can go on forever and ever. Does anybody have any questions or comments based on anything we talked about today or anything that came to mind? Yeah, Beard.
Do you think the constellations will have any bearing on any of this? Because it says a sign in heaven, and you have the Virgo and other stars.
So if you guys remember, September 23rd of 2017, there was a constellation, and you can go, all you have to do is type in Revelation 12 sign, and it'll come up. It'll tell you about 2017. People were really up in arms because up there was the Leo, the constellation of Leo, which has 12 stars. Regulus is this, and it was going to be bright. And the woman of Virgo. If you use all the signs, that constellation appeared with the moon at the feet. So the sign, when you look at the sign, the word sign here in the Bible, it seems more of a spiritual sign, not as much a heavenly sign as like it's used for the stars and the moon is used as a sign. However, what that could mean, I don't overwrite, I don't say because this is the right thing that I told you about, that the other stuff could be wrong. Things can be true at once. All things can be multiply true at once. So I do believe maybe there could have been something that was triggered then. I don't know. Because I think that cycle doesn't happen very often. That could be a secondary sign. That could have been a sign God put up there. Like, hey, this is the Revelation 12 sign in the sky. Just to let you know, it is very, very close. It could have been a nice little warning. It was not the final one. Perhaps God triggered something that day I don't know about. But the ultimate meaning is this symbolic messaging in here. But he definitely does use the stars, and there is a way that sign, like I said, look up September 23rd, 2017 is when the last time it happened. I think it only ever happens like every so many thousands of years, apparently, or something. But that maybe could have just been a sign, more of a secondary sign. Because that got really popular back then. I remember people saying, is the world going to end tomorrow? I was like, I don't think so. And I always tell people, by the way, remember this. Here's an important thing. When people say that sign, and that might have been a real sign, because think of this. In 2017, we're way past that. So some people said, oh, that didn't mean anything. But when I'm driving, I remember driving to San Francisco. I drove to California once, cross country. And I was really far away. I was states away, hours away. But I saw this sign, and it said San Francisco, so many 100 miles. And I knew I was on the right track. And I didn't stop and say, oh, it's been 5-10 miles, that sign. Where's San Francisco? I didn't pull my car over and go, that sign said we'd be at San Francisco. And they'd say, no. That sign said we're on our way to San Francisco. And we'll be at San Francisco soon. But that sign didn't mean San Francisco was there. So that sign of 2017 could have been a true sign. A secondary true sign to point of what's coming. Because a sign says something is coming. It does not say that you're here. That's why we are receiving all these signs, even what you see you turn your TV on, what's going on in the world today. We receive signs because that means something is coming soon, right? And if we didn't see the signs, that'd be a problem. If you don't see signs, it means you're on the wrong track, right? But the fact that we're seeing all these signs means we're on the right track, right? So that's a good question here, because I forgot that was a possibility of coming up. So you can look into that. It happened in September of 2017. The Revelation 12 sign in the stars perhaps is a sign that we didn't have long. Great question, Beard. Anybody else have a question or any comments or things they want to share about it? All right, well, thanks, everybody. Go ahead, read ahead. Lord willing, we're going to keep diving into chapter 12. Mysterious chapter, but I think we're all going to be able to understand it for the most part by the end. So thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Until next time, keep your lamps trimmed and burning. So let's keep going now. Verse number 3, which is connected, obviously, to verse number 2 by the language we're going to see here. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. So it says here, and another sign appeared. So another, meaning being at least one more, right? So it's connecting again. Connecting to that sign, that's why I went from that picture with that woman I found. It's great that they have this dragon and all of a sudden appearing, right? So there's the second thing he sees, right? And you're going to see it's connected. They're going to be opposed. Here was one sign of this woman, and now there's this red dragon, right? And they're going to be these opposite forces. So the woman Israel now has this opposing figure that appears. And what we're going to be shown, basically, is the spiritual conflict behind all of history. That's what this chapter is talking about. That's why it went all the way back to Genesis. Why is it saying that? It's saying all that we see today, all the chaos and the war, I know sin entered, but after that, it's been a spiritual warfare, right, for the souls of humanity. And ever since, he's been after this all the promises of God. And we're going to see how this is unfolded with Eve and her seed and the Satan, the serpent, and his seed, and how even the things going on today and the wars in the world today can all be traced to this concept, this cosmic war that has gone on for the entire history of humanity. So he says, behold, means pay attention, this is significant, a great red dragon. Now, there's a lot of symbology in Revelation. People will tell you, oh, you can't understand Revelation. There's too much symbology. Well, I think we've already proved by now that that's false. But sometimes the symbology is so obvious. This is one of them. Sometimes it's kind of hard to figure out. This one's a super easy one. This is like a slam dunk, what we call a layup or a slam dunk in basketball. So the dragon, later on in verse number 9, it actually tells us that it is Satan. So it gives him up later, right? It'll tell him who this is. This is definitely Satan, right? We can be sure of that because what we'll find out later in verse 9. But it says he is great, right? A great red dragon. Great. Why great? Power and influence. Satan definitely has power and influence today. You can see in the world governments that are running things today. Why red? Well, it's very similar. Remember, we had the 4 horses and there was a red horse. And what did that symbolize? A lot of bloodshed, violence, destruction. Same thing here, because he was the author of all of that as well, right? Why the dragon? Because it was called a serpent in the garden. Why call him a dragon? Now, a dragon is very similar to a serpent. It's a symbol in the ancient Near East, a symbol of chaos, of evil, a terrifying enemy, right? An unknown terrifying enemy. This big, sometimes even a sea creature we'll see about later. It talks in the Bible about a dragon, right? But this imagery points to Satan's nature. Obviously, he does not look like a dragon. He is not big and red, right? And that's why, again, Hollywood always gets him wrong, has him big, red with his pitchfork. Incorrect, right? He's a lot smoother. He'd be incognito. You wouldn't even know him if you saw him. He's so smooth, right? But he is a destroyer. He's an adversary. He's a violent opponent of God's plan. That's what it's telling us with that great red dragon. But that dragon imagery is actually, again, it's been in the Bible. It doesn't just show up here. Isaiah 27, I'll read this. Isaiah 27, verse 1. In that day, it's talking about the redemption of Israel, by the way. In that day, the Lord, with his hard and great and strong sword, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent. Leviathan, the twisting serpent. And he will slay the dragon that is in the sea. Isn't that interesting? So there's been a talk about slaying a dragon, also tied to serpent. Did you know Leviathan, there's a lot of debate about Leviathan, but it's a symbol, obviously, of at least of chaos, right? Chaos and disorder and evil opposed to God. And God, this is saying, is going to control, it's going to kill it with a sword, slay that dragon. Very representative of Satan, right? We also see that imagery in Ezekiel 29. Turn to Ezekiel 29 so you can see this. Ezekiel 29, verse number 3, in the books of the prophets. We see other dragon imagery. And it's going to start to make a little bit more sense. The more we look at these references, the more we can put together of what this is talking about, right? All right. Ezekiel 29, verse number 3. Look what it says. Thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon that lies in the midst of his streams, that says, my Nile is my own, I made it for myself. So here he's talking about a Pharaoh, different Pharaoh than the one back in the Exodus, although they can kind of all be the same archetypical symbol of opposition to God. But the Pharaoh here is called a great dragon. So you had Leviathan called a serpent and a dragon. You have Pharaoh called a dragon. You have Satan here called a dragon. What is all this saying? Well, we're getting hints back here. This Pharaoh called a great dragon was showing that how our earthly rulers have satanic influence. The fact that it called Pharaoh there, or even Leviathan, this chaos, showing that all the chaos of the world that we know, all these world systems that oppose God's, all these worldly kingdoms and their leaders that oppose God's plan are right in line with Satan, right? Because he's the God of this world, and they're just falling right into his hands, right? Now it gets really interesting. This is where it does get a little tougher. All right, this is a lot tougher than the last one. All right, with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems, which are crowns, okay? So what's going on here? Well, the 7 heads, let's break this down because there's a lot to take. The 7 heads are pointing to 7 different kingdoms, and specifically the heads are rulers. Like a ruler is a head of an organization. So sometimes when you see these heads, they're symbolized as kings, and when you see a king, it's symbolized of its nation, okay? Now, first off, we got to notice there's 7 of them. Now, the number 7 is often representative of completeness, right? And usually a good number. We usually associate the number 7 with God and his completeness. And here it does suggest completeness, but in this way, its completeness is in the full scope of Satan's influence across world systems throughout history. What this is showing us, it's going to show us how Satan has actually been working through all the kingdoms, right? Now, it says 7. This is where it gets a little tricky, right? Because go to Daniel chapter 7. Go to Daniel chapter 7, verse 7. Because we never really hear about 7 kingdoms per se, but we can do a little bit of our research and detective work, our homework, and see something going on here. Look at Daniel chapter 7, verse number 7. Okay, look at this. And I think this is going to tie a lot, and it's going to help us make sense of what's going on here. Daniel 7, verse 7. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. All right, I want to say that because look at, there's 10 horns here, so we can make this connection. What does this talk about? There's 4 beasts, so 4 beasts with 4 heads. So we learned here from Daniel, there's 4 heads, and on this 4th one, there's 10 horns. Here we're learning about 7 heads with 10 horns, so the numbers are slightly different. What's going on here? Well, we know from studying Daniel, and you might not know because Daniel, again, is a deep and complex book, but what it was talking about, when Daniel was seeing these 4 beasts, and there's also a dream, if you go back, I think it's chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, it's talking about the 4 kingdoms that were going to be a nuisance and opposed to Israel, right? Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar gets it. He's from Babylon, right? And then we know that it'll be Persia after that, and then it shows Greece, and then this 4th beast that we read about in Daniel there, Daniel chapter 7, that's Rome, right? Rome's that 4th beast. And then Daniel did tell us in the prophecy that the Antichrist would revive the Roman Empire. Sometimes we call it Rome 2.0. He revived this Roman Empire, and that's what we always sometimes call the 5th and final kingdom. But it's really the 7th, if you think about it. Why 7? Well, when Daniel's talking about his present time. He's talking to the Babylonians through God and about what's going to come in the future. But you could actually back up. Before Daniel, there were 2 other kingdoms that were a real big problem, and they actually had control and reign over Israel. The first one we're going over right now with Pastor Brad in Exodus, that would be Egypt. Think about Egypt. They were actually a kingdom that had Israel as slaves. Israel was under them, the kingdom of Egypt. What other kingdom took away the northern kingdom? That would be Assyria. You could say Assyria. And then you have Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. That's 6. Who would be the 7th kingdom? That would be the Antichrist kingdom. So I think there's another way. These 7 heads are very similar to the 4 beasts, the 4 heads that Daniel saw. And it's just because we're talking about the full scope. Daniel was talking about his time and what was coming in the future. But because this chapter is about the full scope of Genesis to Revelation, we're going to get the 7 kingdoms. It's going to go back and say, oh, by the way, and Egypt and Assyria, all that was Satan trying to go against God's plan, go against Israel. This is always part of that plan. And Rome 2.0 is actually the 7th kingdom. And it says 10 horns. Now, if you go back in Daniel 7, verse 7, it said at the end, it was different from all the beasts. It's talking about Rome. That was before it. And it had 10 horns. So now think about this. Not all the beasts had 10 horns in that vision. There's 4 of them, but the 4th one had 10 horns. So the last one in the vision had 10 horns. So if we follow the same pattern, and I think we're going to have a lot of evidence of why we should, only the 7th kingdom is talking about these 10 horns. So what are 10 horns? Well, horns, a lot of times, are symbols of power and strength and authority. And here, I think they're talking about leaders again, or kings. A coalition of earthly power that will be aligned with Satan at the end. The Antichrist kingdom. This is going to be the end-time political system. I keep talking to people. People are asking me about the end times and all the stuff going on in the world and geopolitics. And I say, bottom line, these wars are going to go on and on. But in the end, you should really get concerned about the end being near when they starting to break down all the nations into 10 regions, or 10, which there are maps, like the Club of Rome map. Ironically, look up the Club of Rome map, which is another Rome here. Look that up on your own time. It was designed in the 1960s, I think 1968. And it talks about breaking in the world into 10 regions. That will happen. And I think that's what this is talking about. The rise of this global authority, Satan's final kingdom, is going to have these 10 rulers, which we do learn about, right? Go to Revelation 17. Go ahead a little bit. This is why we have more evidence. Somehow you guys might be saying, this kind of makes sense, Eric, but I don't know. I'm still not completely tracking completely. This might help you. Revelation 17. We're going to jump forward in Revelation. We'll get there whenever we get there, but we have evidence to back up this is the Antichrist 10-nation kingdom. 10 nations, 10 kings, but he rules over them. Revelation 17, look at verse number 9. Revelation 17, verse number 9. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads. All right, here's a good hint. There's 7 heads right there. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, which are, by the way, mountains are usually kingdoms, on which the woman is seated. We're going to learn about her later. They are also 7 kings. There we go. 5 of whom have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast, that was and is not. That's the Antichrist. It is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. Look at this verse right here. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. All right, problem solved. I think I was right from the Daniel stuff here. We definitely have it confirmed here. These 10 horns are 10 kings. Now look at this verse in Revelation 17, and we'll get to that again in the future. Notice it said, here's our hint. There are 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. It sounds like a riddle. 5 of whom has fallen. 1 is, and the other is not yet to come. So there's 7. There's the 7 heads. 5 have fallen. 1 is. Why is he saying that? Well, when was this written? Revelation. This is written during John's time. Who's reigning and ruling during John's time? The Romans. Rome. So he's saying the 5 kingdoms have been destroyed. There's one that we're living in right now, and the other one in the future has not yet come, the Antichrist. That's why he gets down here. He's going to wipe out all these people. There's going to be 10 of these kingdoms. He's going to oversee them. But he's telling us right here in 17, we're going to get there in the 5 chapters, that what we're seeing right here is pointing to the future of Antichrist. The 7 kingdoms, all the kingdoms, there's one more to come yet that's going to try to wreck things, right? By Satan. Satan's going to run it, and we get more, it's more clear in the 7th kingdom because Satan's going to participate actively and openly. You're going to kind of see him working through the Antichrist. So even notice it says there too with these 7 heads. On his heads, 7 diadems. So the 7 kingdoms, the diadems are crowns. The diadems used here are royal crowns. Not the Stephanos, not the victory crowns, not the victor crowns that Israel has or that we wear in the future, right? This is royalty. Why? Because they do rule, they have authority, but they only rule temporarily, and they've actually usurped the power, right? Humans are supposed to be running this with God's power, but Satan has been running it essentially through humanity. So there's a lot going on in this verse here, but it shows that there's real active opposition, and all the things we see today, all the earthly, worldly powers that oppose God's plan, we see like, wow, this is really against God's plan, against the Bible. Shouldn't surprise you, because Revelation here is telling us all those powerful world leaders and that gain dominance are controlled by Satan, right? Verse number 4, continuing on. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. So it says his tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven. So this describes a past action now. So now we're going to go back to the past, right? We were just talking about the future. Now we got to look at the context. It's talking about the past. And this is essentially indicating his original fall that we think of, what the Garden of Eden. Whether he fell before the Garden of Eden or during the garden is a debate, but he fell at that point. That's what we consider his fall, right? And that's what it's talking about, that when he did, the tail, which again, remember in the Bible is a lot of times influence or deception, right? Leading others into rebellion, the tail. So you can see here, he's leading others into rebellion. 1/3 of the angels, right? 1/3 of them, because it says 1/3 of the stars, and the stars here is talking about the angels. This is Satan, and he brings 1/3. A lot of Christians talk about this, but think about this. Why 1/3? Well, 1/3 is less than 2/3, right? So it's showing already, automatically, God has the upper hand by numbers, 2-1. Satan's outnumbered already, let alone God's power outnumbers him, right? But it's a significant number. This is a significant number, though. 1/3 is still a lot. 1 out of 3, a significant number of them have followed Satan. It says they were cast from the earth. They fell from heaven. Now they still have access to heaven, we'll see, but this is their original fall. Basically from being all glorified beings to now profane beings. Meaning like God sees them as profane and outside of his kingdom now, right? This also shows where all the demonic evil forces come from. Why it's not just Satan, it's not just our flesh either. There are other evil angelic beings like Satan that are operating against God's plan, as we see. And it says here, the dragon, which we know to be Satan, stood before the woman. So he's standing before, so he's intentional, right? He's standing before, we're seeing he's waiting, right? This is strategic positioning. It shows that Satan always uses strategy. He's not willy-nilly, he always has a plan too. It's just not as good as God's, right? And he has a target. He stood who? Before the woman. So he's targeting Israel, right? So this is always his plan to target Israel. Even now, this blows people's minds, because again, we are adopted into Israel. We are part of spiritual Israel, the new Israel, they'll say. But Israel still exists. Now, we know that Israel existed to bring the Messiah of Jesus. Israel's not perfect. They're just as sinful as the Gentile nations. And you can see that by reading your Old Testament. But now that the Messiah has come and we're saved, we believe in Christ, why would he still be after Israel? And a lot of people say that we're wrong about this. They say, well, God doesn't care about Israel because we're the new Israel now. Well, we are the new Israel, but he does care about Israel because Revelation and Romans 9-11 and other spots where God is going to wake up the Israelites. And Satan reads the Bible too, probably more than you and me. And he knows that God promised to actually wake up these blind Jews who hate him today in our time. And he's going to wake them up one day. So here's Satan's strategy. If I could just kill all of Israel now, even though Christ came and did all that, I can at least break some of his promise. And I can at least keep the Jews out of there. So you can see this constant opposition. Haman wanted to kill all the Jews back in the book of Esther. That was the Persian kingdom. Why? Probably because he was talking to this guy, Satan, right? Hitler wanted to wipe out all the Jews and bring them and get rid of them. Why? Probably because he's working with this guy and his angels, right? Why today is it such a problem for Israel? And sometimes they create their own problems, maybe, but why is the world going to continue to turn on Israel? Because this guy's going to convince them to. And he's going to lie about it and deceive and all kinds of stuff and mix things up for you. So you start, taking bad decisions people make and making it all about the Jews, which I see today. Why is that happening? Because the Bible said it would. And the Bible said this is his plan. This is his target. He stands before the woman, always waiting, right? He's against Christ's work. And part of Christ's work is to wake up Israel in the end. And he knows that. That's why this is focusing on Israel. It's turning to that. Look what it says. He's focused on her who's about to give birth because he knows He always knows timing's critical. He knew back then that Christ was going to come. He saw all the signs of the prophecies too. So he knew when Christ was going to come, right? So he's always got a strategy, just like he knows that when this moment comes, when the witnesses, he reads this stuff, he knows his time is short, right? So he's waiting on it. It says that so that when she bore the child, which we know is Christ, right? Or you could even say it end up becoming the church later, then we're raptured. Now it's talking about focusing back on Israel, but he might devour this child, destroy the Messiah. He wanted to destroy the Messiah, which again, he's trying to destroy parts of the plan of the Messiah still, even though he couldn't destroy the Messiah. But he has been trying to devour him from the beginning, and he did stand there, right? Think about this. He did stand there. Go back to the time of Mary. Make Mary this woman for a second. We're going to look at the past now. Mary was there giving birth, and Satan stood before Mary. And I think it's true to an extent, right? And how did he try to devour the child? He whispered in Herod the Great's ear, kill all the babies, kill them all, everybody under 2, kill them all. He tried to devour, he did this. This actually played out with Mary, if you think about it in the spiritual sense. This is what was going on. Then it happens today with us. Because he opposed, so you can see it in Jesus' life. Jesus is opposed, he's constantly after the Messiah, and he ends up killing him, which is a part of the trick, right? That's part of the trick. He wants to kill him. So God uses this as a strategy to defeat death, right, for us, right? So he couldn't stop the Messiah. He couldn't stop the redemption that he offered to us. So now, today, Satan attacks Christ through the body of Christ. We're the body of Christ. So we are representative of Jesus' body here today. That's why Satan opposes us so much, right? He opposes because we're here doing the work of the Lord. By the way, it'll later be talking about caught up. That's why I think it's also representative of the body of Christ being caught up later. But that's why today Satan still attacks the body of Christ. And in the tribulation, he's going to target the tribulation saints that are doing Christ's work, waking people up. And he's going to target Israel. If you go to Daniel chapter 8, I'll actually just read it for you for time's sake. Daniel chapter 8, verse 9 and 10, it talks about this tribulation period of when the Antichrist would cause more issues in the tribulation. This is written back in Daniel 8. Out of one of them came a little horn. We just read about horns. This makes sense. Which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. It grew great, even to the host of heaven, and some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled them. So this talks about Satan brought stars down, and then later we'll talk about the Antichrist trampling over all the saints and ruling over the saints. But this verse in Daniel 8 talks about how he brought those stars with him. So it's referencing back to this here. But again, this verse is showing us that Jesus is always the target. He's always been the target, and anybody surrounding him. Jesus' mother was the target before Jesus was born, right? It's always been all the way back to Genesis, and even today, as we do the Lord's work, this whole plan is still in effect. This is still going on. Verse number 5. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, but her child was caught up to God and to his throne. So Satan's waiting on the birth. He knows it's going to happen, and it happens. The birth of the child, she gave birth to a male child. So the woman is Israel, as we're talking about, gives birth to this male child, the long-awaited messianic promise that Israel had been waiting for, right? The birth finally happens. We know this is Jesus. Why male child? Well, showing that he is the promised son, right? He is the promised son of God. He's going to come in the flesh. It's connecting that there. One who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Turn to Psalms. Psalm chapter 2. Go to Psalm chapter 2. This will be more confirmation of who this is talking. This is definitely talking about Jesus here. One who is to rule all nations with a rod of iron. Psalm chapter 2. And we'll go to verse 7. Psalm chapter 2, verse number 7. I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. And look at this. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Look at that. You rule all the nations with a rod of iron, it says here in Revelation chapter 12. So it's connecting. If you read Psalm 2, you know, oh, this is talking about the promised Messiah again. It's connecting. This is Jesus. And he's now ruling, right? That's what we heard about the end of chapter 11. Oh, he's ruling now, who was and who is, right? It's saying this is all happening. What was promised in chapter 2, like a rod of iron, he's going to have absolute authority, firm and righteous judgment. And when his kingdom comes, that's what it's going to be like. So it's referencing that. It's pointing to the millennial kingdom of Jesus Christ. Again, it's looking forward and pointing to this is the one. This is what he came to do. And this is what he's here doing now, which is why we're getting this flashback, right? But it says something interesting. But her child was caught up to God. So Satan here is standing there waiting for this woman to give birth. He wants to devour the child. And as the baby's born, it ascends into heaven before he can even grab it. In this picture that we're seeing, right? In this visual image that we're getting here. What is this pointing to? This is pointing to Christ's ascension. So it's kind of fast forwarding. After his life, he's born. And after his life, he's killed, right? What Satan wanted to do, devour him. But after that, he ascends. So he couldn't really devour him like he wanted to. Christ came back to life and he was raptured. Taken up to heaven, right? Caught up. Caught up is that same kind of version of a rapture, the rapture concept, right? Which also shows that Satan's attempt failed. He wanted to devour the child, and instead, it went up. It was caught up. So again, you can look at this like the church, because we are now the body of Christ. Satan tried to devour us, and right before judgment, we are caught up, which is really interesting. The same concept, because we are of Christ. And then Satan's going to, again, turn his attention to Israel and the tribulation saints in the end times here, in the tribulation. And it also says here, and to his throne, which is important. He was caught up to his throne, not just caught up to be taken away, but to his throne, to rule all the nations, which showed that right then he was already ruling. So today he is already ruling, right? He's just allowing Satan's activity to play out, right? But he is actually ruling, and this whole chapter here, this section, is talking about when he's going to take active leadership and active rule from his throne, right? In Isaiah 9, we read about this a lot of times at Christmas. It talked about how he's going to rule forever, right? For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and with righteousness. And it goes on and on. It's connecting that. Daniel in chapter 7 saw the Son of Man reigning, and it says he was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and language should serve him. He had an everlasting dominion. So what this verse is doing, reminding us again of the victory of Christ over Satan, right? It's also interesting. It's kind of like the gospel and Christ's life, his work, compressed into one verse. So look at this. You can see his birth. She gave birth, so the birth of Christ. So he has victory over death, right? He dies. He's one to rule, so he ascends and reigns. So you can see it's really compressed. A lot of stuff skipped over, obviously. It goes from his birth, his death, his ascension, and reigning. All in one verse. It's kind of interesting. It's a compressed timeline of Jesus Christ and what he did for us, and how it unfolded, and how it's unfolding even now. And now let's look at verse number 6. Another very interesting one. So the woman gives birth, and then look what it says. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. So the woman fled into the wilderness. This is again talking about Israel. We're now talking about the future again, right? The future concept here. So fleeing to the wilderness, fled into the wilderness shows urgency and danger, and of course persecution. Persecution brings urgency and danger, and that's what's going on here. This is not symbolic, although we're going to get some symbolism of her getting taken to the wilderness. Later, it's going to talk about eagles, wings, and things like that. This is a real event that's got to take place. This is how we know why. Turn to Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24, go to verse 15. Jesus referenced this very moment in this verse here. Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. Here's what it says. So here in Revelation 12, it says the woman fled in the wilderness. She's a place prepared by God, and she's been nourished for 1,260 days. Okay. Now, what did Jesus say in Matthew 24, verse 15? He's talking about the end times to his disciples. And what does he say? So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So look what it's talking about. Daniel prophesied that the Antichrist would sit on the temple. So he says, when you see this happen, flee to the mountains of Judea. That sounds like the wilderness. Let the one who is in on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas, for women who are pregnant. That's interesting. And for those who are nursing infants in those days, that's interesting. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. So Jesus references this wilderness in Scripture. He says, hey, when you see the Antichrist sit on that third temple, the future temple, that's going to be built. When you see that happen, run for the hills. Don't even grab your coat. Don't grab an extra pair of clothes. Just take off. Bad news, you got to get out of there. You got to get out of there fast because you're going to get persecuted. It's dangerous, right? So the wilderness in Scripture often represents isolation, but dependence on God, right? And it's usually a place of testing, but also a place of protection. So Israel is going to be driven out, but not abandoned. But Jesus is talking about this moment. So now we can connect this moment right here, because this is what it's talking about. That they would be going hidden in the wilderness for 3.5 years. When? Well, now we have a clue. When the abomination of desolation happens. When does that happen? In the middle of the tribulation. So that shows, when we were reading chapter 11, and I was talking about how it shows the two witnesses in the first half of the tribulation, then they get killed, and it triggers the second half. That's what I think was happening. This is more proof of it, because we're seeing this happen, and Jesus said this would happen right at the middle when he would break his covenant with Israel. This is when this would happen. So Jesus in Matthew 24 was talking about Revelation 12:6 here, and now it's here. Israel will be driven out in the end, but they will not be abandoned. And this is a pattern that we see in the Bible, a pattern that God cares for Israel even when they're alone and isolated in the wilderness, just like he cares about you, even when you're isolated and alone in the wilderness. Go to Hosea. It's a little bit harder to find. It's in the minor prophets, Hosea chapter 2. Hosea chapter 2, verse number 14. This is God talking to Israel in this verse. Hosea chapter 2, verse number 14. This is what it says. Therefore, behold, I will allure her, he's talking about Israel, and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. So God is talking about how he's going to bring Israel into the wilderness and speak tenderly. So wilderness, isolation, but caring for her, right? Which is kind of what he's saying here, right? It's symbolizing that. Also, the Exodus. Think about this. Remember, the Bible's full of symmetry. Did you notice? The Bible starts with the garden, and then it goes into the wilderness, and now we're kind of reversing that. It's going to be wilderness into later on, we know at the end of the Bible, the garden. So we're seeing the Exodus into Genesis backwards here happening. But here's some wilderness time, just like God took Israel into the wilderness. Those 40 years in the desert in the wilderness, but he provided and he nourished them. Isn't that interesting? But I love what it says, though, where she, meaning Israel, has a place prepared by God. This is prepared by God himself. You know what this reminds me of? Very similar to when Jesus says, I go and prepare a place for you. So he prepares a place for us. But did you know, even in the end times, he's always preparing, like even in our own individual lives, he's always preparing a place for us to be in the future. He's always working it out now. Right now, he's working behind the scenes, preparing places in the future in our lives that will be. But he also does this for Israel in the tribulation. He has prepared a place, right? Prepared means it was getting ready before they got there, which means wherever they end up in the wilderness, God has prepared it already. And what's really interesting is there's a lot of us that believe it'll be Petra, which is in Jordan. Look it up. It's the old land of Edom that the Bible talks about. And you can go there. I've gone there in my Oculus to walk around. Petra, I haven't gone there in person, but it looks wild. The carved stones. A lot of people believe they're going to end up in Petra. Maybe, maybe not. But what's really funny to me is I was reading this and I found out there's Christian businessmen around the world that send Hebrew tracts, talk about Jesus, and food. And they've sent it to Petra. So if you go to Petra right now, there's a bunch of food and tracts about Christ there. So what I love about that first is that they're reading their Bibles and they have a good hint. I think they're going to go to Bozrah or Petra, what it's called today. But at the same time, it makes me laugh because they think that God needed their help. Like that God needed them to send these tracts and this food. And that's the only way this is going to be fulfilled. Like we had to help them through the Exodus and the wilderness. You know what I mean? Like, so what's funny is we always want to help God. We're like the little kid, like, let me help. There's really nothing we can do to help. God's got it figured out. If he wants you to help, he'll tell you and you can help. But if you do it on your own, like I'm going to go send food, and I'm going to go prepare a place. No, it said God's going to prepare the place, prepared by God. And if he wants to use it, he will. But God's going to have this all taken care of because he took care of them in the wilderness after Egypt too, okay? Now look at what it says, which she is to be nourished, right? Again, that's more reference to Exodus. Go to Exodus chapter 16. Exodus chapter 16, verse 4. I love this though, because God doesn't just hide Israel. He provides for her. He did the same thing in the wilderness. When they wandered in the wilderness, he provided. Exodus chapter 16, verse number 4. Look what it says here. Then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day. So God's done this before, actually. God has actually nourished them with manna in the wilderness before. He sustained Israel physically before. How is God going to sustain Israel? We don't know. And maybe a little bit of food. I honestly think it would be funny if like they get there and all the food is spoiled that everybody sent ahead of time. But then it rains manna. God's like, I got you. So I'd imagine There's a chance. We have evidence. I don't know how he'll do it. Maybe he will send, I don't know, ravens. He could send ravens with meat. That's happened before. He could rain bread from it. I don't know. He can make water come from the rocks by them for drinking water. I don't know. But he's done all those things, so that's possible. I'm not worried that they're going to be without nourishment because God just promises it's going to happen, and he'll take care of it. I love one time I was told a long time ago, God's will is God's bill, right? So he'll cover the bill. He'll make sure he gets people who he needs. If he needs humans, he'll get them there. But I think it's going to be more like the ravens and the bread from heaven because he's done it before. It's just really interesting. We're seeing this pattern. And look at what it says, too. For 1,260 days. We keep seeing that pop up over and over. 1,260 days. Remember the calendar year, the old ancient calendar, 360-day calendar year. So this is 3.5 years. And is connecting again to that second half of the tribulation we call the Great Tribulation, right? Where the Antichrist breaks that deal and claims to be God and is just full-blown evil. He's not going to hide it. He's going to hide it for the first 3.5 years. He's not going to hide it. That's what this is connecting it to. When that happens, that last 3.5 years, going back to chapter 11, it was also called 42 months, that the city would be trampled, talking about the same time. This is when this all happens. Now, Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, this is the one I was referencing earlier, where during this whole time, the Antichrist is going to be after Israel and after the saints. It says in Daniel 7, verse 25, he shall speak words against the Most High, talking about the Antichrist, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law. And they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. That's 1,260 days, 3.5 years it's talking about. So again, Daniel connected this time where he's going to wear out the saints. He's going to be hunting. We're going to find out in a little bit later. He's going to hunt for Israel. When he can't find Israel, he's going to go and try to kill all Christians anywhere he can. He's just going to be furious because Satan is furious, and Satan is operating his power through the Antichrist, right? But again, it's only 1,260 days. It's a long time. 3.5 years is a long time, but it is a limited period of intense persecution. Honestly, a lot less than the 40 years that the Israel had to do it in the past. This is 3.5 years. It's limited, but it's going to be a real time, and God is in control because he's the one, again, preparing things. So that means he has sovereignly gone ahead of Israel, right, and prepared things, just like he's gone ahead for us in our lives, prepared things. And the biggest version of him going ahead and preparing things is what he did with Christ. Think about all he prepared for us before he got to the cross, what Christ did. So God is going to be fully capable of handling everything here. I'm going to stop here because we'll end up going into another section and we'll go really deep. We won't have time to go through all the verses I want to there, but does anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts they have based on what we talked about here today or something else? Yeah, Paul, go ahead.
Oh, just it reminded me of the woman at the well with the water that Jesus would provide, and also Mary too, back when with Joseph being let out.
Oh, yes. Yeah, what's really interesting too, as well, I'm glad that you said this about the wilderness and Joseph and Mary. Here's another connection I didn't explain, but Paul's kind of hinting at it here, is think about Jesus' life. Now, this whole verse is telling us I'm talking about the future. But remember, again, Revelation is past, present, future. That's why people get in these arguments. That's why the preterists will tell us it already happened in the past, and the futurists like us will say, no, it's going to happen in the future, but both are right. Remember, same thing here. This verse told us, well, this whole section here that we're reading told us that Satan stood there waiting for the baby to be born, right? And we're talking about this. And then when it was born, tried to devour it, but it ascended. And then the woman went into the wilderness, right? The wilderness. Well, you can even see the woman, Mary, she went into the wilderness after she bore Jesus, right? Because why? Herod was trying to kill all the babies. So where did they go? To Egypt, right? So you can see this pattern here. They went to Egypt and they were brought out and they were prepared for it. We don't know how. I'm sure they were able to, God provided for Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus while they were in Egypt fleeing persecution. So you can see this pattern here of these past things that have happened. You can see these reoccurring themes. And remember, the past, if you understand the past and the patterns of the past, you can kind of be a prophet in a way and predict the future because these patterns reoccur over and over. That's a great observation, Paul. Anybody else have any questions or comments or anything that comes to mind based on all this? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Go ahead and read ahead. Lord willing, next week we'll be continuing on here when the war breaks out between Michael and the angels and Satan. So that'll be interesting. Read ahead. Have a great week. And until then, keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Number 7. And now we're going to start focusing on the war in heaven. Another very interesting passage. Verse number 7 here. And war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back. All right, so now we're going to get this war, this conflict in heaven. It's going to kind of zoom into this war, and we're going to kind of get, again, remember that past, present, future kind of a situation where things are going, it's all these tenses all at the same time. But there's a war that arose in heaven. So now the conflict is going to go on to heavenly beings. And war means there's a real conflict. This is kind of mind-blowing for us. Because angels, they don't have physical bodies like we have per se. Like you couldn't kill an angel if they showed up to you. They can't die. So what is going on here? We don't know how it works, but there is some kind of systems they do. There's some kind of physicality to it. We don't know how the spirit world works because we're not there. But there is going to be some kind of real cosmic battle, some kind of conflict. And we talk about the spiritual war all the time. There is real battles going on, at least the way it talks. There's actual fighting and wars between angels going on. And that's what's going on here. It's talking about this cosmic spiritual warfare, which honestly is always going on, and it's reflecting everything that's happening down on earth, right? So what's happening above is dictating what's happening below. That's why we always pray, right, to intercede in the spiritual war. So that's what this is going to talk about. It says this war arose. So something happened for it to arise, right? That means there was nothing, and then it arose. So although there's always war in heaven, this is a special battle, right? Just like you could say, you could say that today. Oh, there's always fights and wars and stuff going on in the world, but there's these certain wars that are bigger, and there's something going on. This is different than what usually you see, right? That's kind of what's going on here. This is also going to be tied. It's going to be important to see this. This is also tied to the midpoint of the tribulation, right? This is tied to, just like before, when the two witnesses were taken up. The witnesses witnessed for the first half, that 3.5 years, and now we're in that middle period. Now there's a turning. They've ascended. They've gone to heaven. And now Satan's going to be mad. You're going to see he's getting thrown out. He's very, very angry. So this is what's happening. This war is taking place right in the middle of that 7-year tribulation. That's when this war seems to arise, the one that it's talking about here. But it says he fought with Michael and his angels. Who is Michael? If you've read the Bible a lot, you know. Maybe you're newer to it. Who's Michael? Michael's one of the archangels. And he's mentioned quite a bit of places in the Bible. I've actually mentioned him a couple of weeks ago, or maybe months ago now, I don't know. It's been a while. Remember the two witnesses? Remember I talked about how I believe Moses is one of them, and because, God buried his body, and then Satan fought for his body. Satan fought for somebody. Remember, it was in Jude we find out of this, verse 9. Listen to what it said, remember? But when the archangel Michael, contending with the devil, was disputing about the body of Moses, he did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, but said, the Lord rebuke you. So Michael and the dragon have fought before. We actually read about it. I referenced it before. They had some war. They had some battle over Moses' body at one point, right? This is that same Michael. This is that same Satan. This is the same ones that fought. So he's already had an impact on this situation here. The reason a lot of this is going on, you can see Michael's been involved. Michael brought Moses' body back somehow. And if you look into this, Michael is somehow tied with resurrection. I don't know the details completely of it, but when you see resurrection, the voice of the archangel we're going to hear, that's Michael. He brought Moses back. In Daniel 12 it talks about this. So there's something, God's given him some kind of power associated with resurrection, but there's some kind of war going on here. Probably once that happened and they got brought back up, there's another war that arises. It's the same Michael. Go to Daniel chapter 10 though. We've seen Michael in other places. Daniel chapter 10. Now here he didn't necessarily fight with the devil, he didn't fight with the dragon, but he did in a way, because just like I said earlier, and I said last week, all the evil worldly systems are run by Satan, so that's essentially fighting the dragon, right? If you're at war with a worldly government today that you think's evil, say if you think, Iran or China or whoever, Russia, you think one of these are evil, whatever they're doing evil is the dragon. The dragon is behind it, Satan is behind it. But look at Daniel chapter 10, go to verse 13. Daniel chapter 10, verse 13, and we'll go the 2 verses here. We'll read. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But Michael, there he is, one of the chief princes, came to help me. For I was left there with the kings of Persia, and came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days. For the vision is for days yet to come. That's interesting. Now look down at verse 20. Go down a little bit further. Then he said, do you know why I have come to you? But now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. There it is again. And when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends by my side against these, except Michael, your prince. That's him. So notice he's referencing Daniel 10. Why am I taking you here? Well, it said Michael is one of the chief princes. So a chief prince, archangel, there's that language prince. Well, I know Michael's not a real person. He's not a prince on the earth. So this has some spiritual prince language. This is very similar to Ephesians when you hear about thrones, princes, principalities, dominions. These are ranks of spirits. Because look at it. The prince of Persia. He was out fighting with. Michael had to go fight the prince of Persia. Which means there's some evil high-ranking god of Persia, the gods of Persia, the spirits. There's some evil high-ranking spirit that was actually preventing Daniel's prayers from being answered. Daniel here is praying. He's actually fasting and praying for 3 weeks, 21 days. And he can't get his answer because there's a war in heaven going on. That's basically what this is talking about. But here he's fighting with Persia. What's really interesting, if you go down to verse number 20, it said, Behold, the prince of Greece will come. What's really interesting about that, we live way after this time, so you just read right past it. But this was written to Daniel. Now Daniel's back in the times of Babylon and Persia. Greece doesn't come till after Daniel dies. So look at this. There's a war going on where he even knew after he defeated the prince of Persia, there was going to be another prince of Grecia, or Greece. But Greece didn't come yet. But if you know history, Greece conquers Persia later on. So you can see this has been hundreds of years in the future, or 100 years earlier, there was this event that happened, and you can already see Greece was fighting. Greece was fighting Persia in the spirit realm before it came hundreds of years later, because there's some kind of a delay from the spirit world to the earthly realm. But we're seeing that Michael has fought before. He is the chief prince. He has fought Persia. He's fought Greece. That means he probably what? He probably fought the prince of Egypt. He probably fought the prince of Assyria. He probably fought the prince of Rome. He just didn't write about it, right? He's fought all these princes. Michael's fought all of them, you'll find out. Because he's heavily associated with Israel, right? So you can see this chaos is building. And why does Michael show up? Because, remember, everything's pivoted to Israel. We're pivoting to Israel now. They're about to wake up. Remember, they were blind. Romans 11 tells us Israel is blind right now. That's why if you go over to Israel right now, they're not Christian. They wouldn't believe in Jesus. They're still blind. But they will be woken up. And that's what's happening at this point. The Antichrist breaks that 7-year deal. He claims himself to be God, right? And now the Jews have to run and hide. They believe in Christ. And this is where all anti-Semitism comes from, honestly, right? Now, I'm not saying either that you can't disagree with the government of Israel for doing something. You can't disagree with Israel or whatever. But this is where anti-Semitism, this is why people start to hate the Jews in Israel. And you ask them why, and they'll start with this weird reason, and then it spirals into this hatred. I know people right now that it's happening to, that I actually know. But where does this hatred come from? It comes from Satan. Satan knows this is part of it. It's a revelation. This is going to happen. So he's always trying to snuff them out. If he can snuff Israel, if he can snuff the Jews out, he can eliminate this plan, which God wrote, so it's definitely going to happen. But Michael's defending them because Michael is the defender of Israel. So you found out about, like I talked about, the prince of Persia, the prince of Greece. I talk all the time about the gods, the Gentile gods, right, of Tower of Babel. How every nation, even today, has an evil god or spirit that is over them. But then remember, God had his own nation of Israel. And God put Michael over Israel in the same fashion. Why did he do that? Why, although God is the God of Israel, why did I put it and then he put Jesus or God over Israel? Why? Because he is not an equal. These are not equals. He's not going to be on equal terms with these things. He'll put his own being, his own princess that he created as well to war and fight. So we're getting a peek at what I always talk about, the Gentile gods. But every time you saw a war, and you saw, for example, when you saw Elijah on Mount Carmel and Baal fighting, that was going on. That was the dragon and Michael behind the scenes. We're getting basically what it's telling us, this has been going on all the time. Michael, when there's a thing with Israel going on, Michael's at war with the dragon, with this other, Gentile god, just this prince, along with Satan. You can see that here. And it's going on here. Daniel 12, if you're still there, you can actually flip ahead 2 more chapters and just look at the first verse. Michael's mentioned again, and he's mentioned about this exact time period I'm talking about. Daniel 12, verse 1, it told us about this event. Daniel was told about it. It said, at that time shall arise who? Michael, the great prince who has charge of your people. Who is your people? Well, he's talking to Daniel. Daniel's people are the Jews, right? So, right here, we have it. Michael, the great prince who's in charge of your people, the Jews. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never has been seen since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered. Everyone whose name shall be written in the book. Right there it said it. He said, hey, in the end, it's going to be the worst than you've ever seen it for your people. Michael will show up. He'll defend your people. Don't worry, right? It's going to be awful. Nobody's ever seen that before. But at that time, you'll be delivered. It sounds not like this. But God will prepare a place in the wilderness. You'll be taken care of. That is what this is talking about. Daniel in chapter 12, I think, is getting a vision of this. Because, again, this is pivoting to Israel and the Jewish people. That's what this focus is really about in this chapter. Their eyes are going to be open. That's why Michael makes an appearance. Because he's their bodyguard. He's their security, right? He's a security leader. He's their war general. He's basically the war general of Israel. And I love that it calls him the chief princes. Here's how I think of it. There's 2 angels named in the Bible. There's one that is Michael. Who's the other one? Who's the other angel that's named?
Gabriel.
Gabriel, good. Gabriel. So there's 2 angels named. So they both are pretty important. And here's how I think of it. God has his own departments, almost like a CEO does. You have your leaders of all these things. So you got Gabriel. What is Gabriel always doing? Gabriel is always coming to give a message of the messianic kingdom. The Messiah is going to come. He's going to rule. Gabriel's always doing this. What is he? He's the chief of communications. He's the PR guy. So Gabriel is God's like chief of communications, if you know in the C-suite what that would be. So what is Michael? Michael would be like chief of security. He's a chief of security. He's the war director, like Department of War. He's in charge of that. So you can see he's always in charge of the war, security in the kingdom, security in heaven, security in Israel, protecting them. And Gabriel never really worries about that. He's always worried about delivering these messages. He's a communication director. So you can see even the angels God has have these different jobs about them. This is why Michael says this. That's why Gabriel shows up, because they're in charge of their own departments. And that's why he says he's one of the chief princes, because that's what he does. And it says, of course, here he's fighting against the dragon. I already told you that was Satan. So you got the holy angels and the false, because I got Michael and his angels. His angels are really God's angels, right? They're on the good side. They follow God. And then you have the dragon and his angels. Who are those angels? Well, those are, if you look at Revelation 12, verse 4, a couple verses back, remember it says his tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth? That's them. Those are the angels, 1/3 of them. So right now, God's up 2-1, right? God's up 2-1, 2 angels to 1 angel. But these are fallen angels, not to be confused with demons, although sometimes we'll call them demons. They're demonic, meaning they oppose, God. But these are different demons, or maybe disembodied Nephilim, we think, right? But these are the fallen, evil angels, and they're also fighting. So what does this tell us? This shows us that Satan fights back. Why is Satan fighting back? Because I think he's getting an eviction notice. He's getting kicked out. Border Patrol showed up, essentially. He says, hey, you got to leave. You can't come back in. So, of course, he's kicking and screaming. Satan's kicking and screaming. He says, I'm not leaving heaven. I'm not getting out of here. And this war breaks out. So it shows us evil will always resist. When you got to do something good and you got to change something that's evil, don't be surprised when the evil gets louder and it starts to get stronger and it starts to lash out. You probably see this in life in some forms. That's what Satan does, and that's what he does here. But this whole verse here reminds us spiritual warfare is very real. As I even read in Daniel 10, it affects our lives. So heaven is very active in Earth's story, although we forget that sometimes, which is why prayer is important, which is why you should pray without ceasing, because I don't know how to use a sword in the spirit world, but God and Michael and the angels can, right? You pray to God, and he'll take care of it all. Michael will take care of whatever he's got to take care of, to whatever, right? But you can see they're very active, and you can also see that God uses his angelic agents like Michael and others to do his bidding. Why? Because I love this. Satan is not an equal. Satan would love to be an equal to God, but you won't even see here. That's why I love it. It doesn't say now war rose and God and Satan fought. It doesn't say that. That's how our minds think of things. You go out and talk to anybody in the world, it's Satan versus Jesus, Satan versus God. Although it kind of looks like that in the sermon, it's really not, because they're not even close. That's a creator versus a creation. That's never equal. That's never been equal, right? So that's what's going on here. And it's fascinating to see. Also, you can see how this is escalating. First, remember, verse 1, a woman appears. So talk about Israel. Then the dragon appears. Then the child is born. Then it triumphs. Then the woman's protected and war breaks out. You can see it just keeps escalating and escalating and escalating. And that's how it's going to be in the end. They fought back. And look what it says, though, in verse number 8. But he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. So, how wild is this? We've been reading about him in chapter 12. He is a great red dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, sweeping down stars, and he fights. He sounds like this great big monster that I wouldn't want to tell this story to my son before bed, right? About this dragon. Sounds so terrifying. But then, but he was defeated. Super simple, but he was defeated. 4 words. He, of course, referred to Satan. And you'd imagine we got this, this great, like I said, that whole analogy of, or the symbolism of who he is, this great big monster. What do you expect, like in a storybook? Like, if I turn this into publishing, the publisher would probably return it and say, hey, listen, I love what you did with the dragon, you built him up really good, but then you kind of lost me in the battle. Where was the battle scene? Like, you built him up, and then where was this? And he fought. There was no battle scene. Why? And then, whoever, John would say, well, hey, God told me to write it like this because there was really no battle. It wasn't equal. And basically the story here is God's letting us know this is not an equal battle. There's no battle scene because it wasn't intense. Although it looked intense, God always wins. He can give as much might and power to Michael, so it's still lopsided. Even Michael's fighting. But Jesus didn't even fight him. There's no battle scene, so it's just trying to let us know that Satan is nowhere near as strong as God and his angels. It's just so lopsided. He got built up so strong, and then in 4 words, but he was defeated. That's it. So it's kind of a slap in the face of Satan. I think God designed it that way. Then look what it says. There is no longer any place for them. Who is them? Well, that's, again, Satan and his angels. So the access is revoked. No longer means something, right? If I said, hey, you no longer can drive a Lamborghini, you'd say, I never drove one. How can I no longer do something I never did, right? So no longer means he was formerly permitted. These angels are formerly permitted, right? So Satan had some form of access in the heavenly realm. Go to Job chapter 1. We have proof of this. This checks out. You can do your research in the Bible. Go to Job chapter 1. And we can find something really interesting here, which will go right hand in hand with this verse that we're reading about here. Job chapter 1, go to verse number 6, if you're there. Job chapter 1, verse number 6. All right. Now we're going to read about the sons of God. Remember the sons of God in Hebrew, that's B'nai Ha-Elohim. That's always a reference to spiritual beings. So we're about to see a scene. We're going to see a spiritual heavenly scene with God and these high-ranking angels, okay? Job chapter 1, verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. So he had access. Wow. The Lord said to Satan, from where have you come? Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it. Isn't that interesting? Look at that. From walking up and down on it. What does that tell me from that passage there? Satan got to come in. So there's some kind of angelic meeting, high angel power meeting. They roll in, the sons of God are here with God, and then Satan shows up, right? Somehow he got through security, so security didn't stop him, but I don't think Michael's a bad angel that Satan could slip through. He defeated him, right? So he's let in. He had access. He even said, where did you come from? Oh, I was walking up and down to the earth. What does that mean? From the spirit world down to the earth to the spirit realm. Just like the angels, I say now, all the weird stuff going on, they can come down, they can go back, they can come down. So he's been doing this before. He's had access, and we read that in Job there. But now this access ends. That's what's going on here, right? Is access to heaven. Expulsion from the heavenly realm. So he's kicked out of heaven. Now, again, this is important, right? It's not annihilation. A lot of Christians, a lot of really good Christians who I love, sometimes will get a lot of this stuff, what's going on wrong. They'll say, well, hey, they're going to be down there now. They didn't believe in Jesus. They're down there in hell now with Satan. Like, no, they're not. Because hell didn't even get the lake of fire you're talking about. Hasn't even been created yet. That's called Sheol. And also, Satan's not even there. Satan's not trapped anywhere. He's not also, by the way, Satan's not even the king of hell. He's not even in charge. He's not a boss of anything. He'll be in hell. He'll be separated from God just like everybody else. It's not like he's in charge. He's only in charge today, and only because God is allowing it. So he's not in hell. He's not annihilated. And by the way, after this, he's kicked out of heaven, but he's even not going to be annihilated then. What's he going to do next? He's going to get locked up for 1,000 years. Then he's going to get let out, and then he's going to get thrown in the lake of fire. So there is a process to this. Satan is not in hell. He's roaming around. He's roaming around somewhere on the earth today, in the spirit realm, whatever's going on, right? But that's what's going on. But like I said, Michael and his angels have kicked him out. This is not the lake of fire. But you can tell Satan is going to start getting riled up because he knows, of course, he get kicked out of heaven. He's a little mad. His time is short. But notice the contrast right now going on here. We read the earlier verses. So remember how it started out with the woman having the child, which is Jesus Christ. And what was he? He was caught up to God's throne. Now what do you have with the dragon? Then the dragon is cast down. He's thrown down. He's cast down out of heaven. So you're seeing Christ is exalted. Christ is lifted up. And Satan is thrown down, expelled, downcast. So you're seeing a deliberate contrast. Christ rose up, Satan thrown down, right? One ascends, one falls. And you're seeing that here. Verse number 9. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. So the great dragon, again, we know that was Satan, was thrown down. So, all right, he was thrown down. So is this talking now? Is this talking about the past, like in the beginning when he was thrown down? Because it does mention the ancient stuff. It's going back to Genesis stuff. Is it talking about then? Or is it talking about now? Because it's talking about Michael is fighting him now, and he's going to get kicked out of heaven, but he's not kicked out of heaven now, right? So when is this? Well, from Luke 10, verse 18, I can read it for you. Remember what Jesus said? Jesus said to his disciples in Luke chapter 10, verse 18, he said to them, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. So he saw it. So Jesus talks about it in past tense. Now it's tricky, because of course he's God, so is he talking about this event in the future tense? I don't think so. He could be, but I don't think so. I think it actually happened in the past. Go to Isaiah chapter 14. Isaiah chapter 14. Jesus is talking about it in the past, and I think he's actually meaning it in the past. But while you're turning there to Isaiah 14, I love again this verse. It's pretty much repeating what happened before. He is thrown down. It's showing that, God's not going to negotiate with Satan. Satan's not going to be able to negotiate access. He's thrown out. He's being cast out. It's repeated over and over and over again, right? It's almost like, hey, and then you lost the game. Hey, remember when you lost the game? Remember when you lost? That's kind of what's happening here. It's that repetition that we're getting, that he was thrown out. Look, Isaiah 14, verse number 12. This is a reference, we believe, to Satan in the past. This is the past. Isaiah 14. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. How you are cut down to the ground. You who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will set up the mount of assembly and the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. So right there, it's talking about some kind of past fall, it seems like. So Satan did fall in the past, but he's going to fall again in the future, because it's fallen from heaven there. And Ezekiel 28, I'll read it for you. Ezekiel 28 is the other one, in verse number 12. It says, thus says the Lord God, you are the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of Eden. Every precious stone was your covering. And it goes on to talk about sardius, topaz, diamond, lists all of them. On the day that you were created, they were prepared. You were an anointed guardian cherub. I placed you. You were on the holy mountain of God. In the midst of the stones of fire you walked. You were blameless in your ways from the days you were created. And it goes on and on and on. But then it says, your heart was proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I exposed you before kings to feast their eyes on you. So, again, in past tense, he was cast down. But Satan never lost access. That was more of like a fall, like almost kind of think about Adam and Eve. Like, don't eat of the fruit or you shall surely die, right? Well, did they die when they ate the fruit? Yes. Well, they didn't fall over dead for hundreds of years, but there was something that happened spiritually. They spiritually died, they fell, they were cut off from God. That same kind of fall happened here. The fall of Satan, very similar. A moral failure, right? This new thing from glorious to profane. He's no longer on God's side. He's now over here, which means he will no longer get power from God. He will now be weaker than the other angels. Because by default, God will give them more power than him. And he does with Michael and the angels. You can see that, right? So it was more of a moral fall, of the spiritual fall. Now here we are getting the futuristic physical fall, where he'll actually be kicked out of heaven, no longer able to access the spirit realm, will be stuck here on earth. Now, could you imagine what our headlines would look like, the news would look like, if Satan were down here on earth, not in the spirit realm, but running around on earth? It would get chaotic, and I'd imagine it's going to, because the Bible said it. But it did, of course, call the ancient serpent. Again, Genesis 3, look at the connection it's making. The enemy that was introduced in Genesis, that serpent in the tree, and that woman, right? What do we hear in Genesis 3, verse 15? I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. That's playing out again. This Genesis 3:15, playing out. It was a reference. This is like a bigger version of it. It's been happening all through time. This is like the culminating event of that happening here, right? Revelation's moving towards that crushing that Genesis 3 talked about, right? The bruising of the heel's already happened with Christ. The crushing of the head, that's what this is talking about. That was prophesied back in Genesis. So in Genesis, the serpent enters. In Revelation, the serpent is judged, thrown down. He'll be crushed later. So you can see it's bookended by God there Of course, it says who is called the devil. Devil meaning a slanderer or an accuser. That's what we'll see him called later too. He's an accuser. He's always accusing us of sin. Think of it like a courtroom. There's a judge up there. Jesus is your lawyer to defend you. Satan's over there trying to accuse you of all these crimes, all these sins, and get you thrown into hell. And Jesus is there, your defender. So there's all this going on at all times. That's why we get this courtroom language. He's also known as Satan. Remember, these aren't his real names. Devil and Satan, these are not real names. We don't even know his name. And that's actually the disrespectful part. I love it. God wants to disrespect Satan on purpose in that way. We don't know his name. Satan just means an adversary. A devil means an accuser or a slanderer. Satan, or Satan, means an adversary, an opposer. Basically, he opposes God's people, and he opposes God's purposes. But notice all these names that John gives to Satan. He gives him the dragon, serpent, devil, Satan. Why all these names? He's actually telling us about the character of the enemy. He is like a dragon. He's violent and very hostile. He's like a serpent. He's very deceptive, full of deception and deceit. He's a devil. He will accuse you falsely, right? And he's like Satan. He's a Satan. He's an opposer. He'll constantly oppose anything you do. So he's violent, deceptive, an accuser, a slanderer, and opposes anything God does. He is the full-blown enemy of us and the world and God, right? The deceiver of the whole world, it says. That's his main weapon, right? By the way, go back to Genesis. That's how this whole thing started. Did God really say, right? That still is asked today. People ask that today all the time because it's Satan in the background, right? He's always trying to get you to doubt God, just like he did to the woman back here, Eve, right? In the Garden of Eden, right? That's always been the strategy, to deceive. And you can see that deception today. And there's a lot more deception coming. It can continue, right? Deception against God's people, deception about God's plan, what's really going on in the world. There's a lot of deception. It's only going to increase. But again, showing that he was thrown down to the earth. His angels were thrown down with him. So again, showing this Bible's a unified story. What happened started in Genesis. What God promised is coming to fruition and completion, right? A full story unfolding here. And it says, and I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down. He accuses them day and night before our God. So now there's this loud voice, this loud proclamation. It's a victory announcement, right? Another victory announcement, right? Now the salvation. So it says now, that's crucial. Something that wasn't there before. Now it's not talking about personal conversion. It's not talking about our salvation. It's talking about it in a kingdom sense. Now the salvation of creation and the world at full, right, has come. So again, it's associating this event, this war with Satan, Satan being thrown down in the middle of the tribulation as the kingdom coming, right? So we saw that. Look at Revelation 11, verse 15. Last chapter, what did it say? Then the seventh angel blew his trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. So this is tied directly to the seventh trumpet, like I said before. That seventh trumpet, when it's saying the kingdom has come, it's a 3.5-year process, right? But it's tying it to Revelation 12. So Revelation 12 is not some weird random story about dragons and stars and angels, these weird things. No, it's telling us all this stuff is tied. The end is here. What was started at the beginning of Genesis has now come to an end. It is now ending, right? This is all tied together. And that seventh trumpet was what this was talking about, right? It's showing us the whole story. It's giving us a big flashback of everything in the past and why we're at this moment. And then what happens, right? Because the authority of Christ has come. Christ is now kicking him out of heaven. We're starting to see things happen because Satan had access before, and now he doesn't. Things are changing. God's kingdom is coming. And Satan is going to get pushed out further and further and further until eventually, after millennium, he's completely gone, right? So you can see the beginning of the expulsion is happening. Again, there he's thrown down again. He's called an accuser again. Zechariah 3, we didn't go there, but we've gone there before. He accused in Job. He accused in Zechariah, right, about the filthy garments, and God had the filthy garments removed, so you can see that court language again. Who accused them day and night. So that shows you how relentless Satan is today. He's still accusing us, going to God, right, who has us covered, trying to accuse us, falsely accuse us, because God has already covered it. His blood has already, covered everything. So we are safe from his accusations. Verse number 11, it says, so there's a celebration in heaven, and then it says, and they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives, even unto death. So it's saying they conquered them after this announcement. Conquered who? Conquered Satan, right? How did they conquer him? Because who is this talking about? This is talking about the martyrs who were killed probably by the beast and by Satan, maybe of all time, maybe during this tribulation, maybe the ones that will come, right? But it says they conquered them. The irony again. Sometimes the Bible's upside down. Those who are persecuted and killed are the victors. They're the conquerors. Why? Because of the blood of the Lamb. That's where victory begins, the blood of the Lamb. It didn't say they won because of what they did. The first thing it says, they won because of the blood of the Lamb, because of what Jesus did. Not human strength, not military power. They didn't put some army together. It was what Jesus did, right? And that's exactly how Israel did it in the past. In Exodus 12, we had a reflection of this. How did they defeat death back then? How did they avoid the death angel back then? By being covered by the blood. They conquered Egypt, and you could say, by the blood of the Lamb, which is Jesus Christ. Right? How do you defeat by the blood? Well, remember, he's the accuser. He accuses them of sin, and the blood of Christ answers and says, nope, that's been paid for, right? That'd be like saying something like, oh, hey, you owe me $100. Like, no, I already paid that for him. It's like, well, he still owes me $500. Like, well, I paid that bill for him too. So that's what's going on here. Satan's always trying to find ways to send us to hell, and the blood is always answering. That's what's going on here. Also, by the word of their testimony. Shows that they were faithful witnesses. They actually believed. And a testimony, they were confessing Christ. They were a loyal witness. So they didn't conquer by silence, but by sharing the good news of the gospel and what Christ had did for them, right? For they loved not their lives even unto death. So they didn't have fear. They didn't value this life, this world more than the next. They put it in its right place, right? Death did not defeat them. They defeated through death. So you can see everything is upside down here, which is pretty wild. Psalm 44 talked about this moment too. Psalm 44 talked about the martyrs in verse 22. Yet for your sake we are killed all the day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. So throughout history, there's always going to be the plan. Still happens today. You can hear about Nigeria, Christians being killed for their faith. But they defeat Satan. They defeat that dragon. That dragon out there today even killing Christians, right? They are defeated by the blood of the Lamb. That's how victory comes. It comes through the blood of Christ, not through anything we do, which is actually a relief, in my opinion. And then here, verse number 12 continues that thought there. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. So there's this celebration in heaven. It's celebrating, yes, Satan has been defeated, even though, again, we know there's going to be 3.5 years of chaos on earth. More people are going to die. But I love that in the celebration, it says, don't worry, the martyrs are victors. I know it's going to get ugly for 3.5 years. They win. But then it goes on here. Hey, rejoice, O heavens. Therefore, connecting to what just happened with that war with Michael and his angels, throwing the devil down, throwing Satan down. Rejoice, heavens. Why would they rejoice? They're rejoicing because the accuser has been evicted. He's been kicked out, right? It's like the person at your event, some event, or somebody there, and somebody's being a jerk or yelling, like, when they leave. You ever see at an event, somebody's acting, like, really bad in public, and then everybody claps when they leave, somebody takes them out? That's a celebration. Yay, they're gone, right? That can happen sometimes, right? Sometimes you have to call the police and they have to remove them from environments. It happens. You can watch YouTube videos of this. That's what's going on. They're cheering, like, thank you, he's gone, he's out of here. Because the angels don't have to deal with him. He's not in the heavens anymore. So that's why they're celebrating, right? There's worship and celebration. Who's celebrating? Us. We're up there celebrating this. Remember, we're in heaven. The angels, we're all celebrating that Satan has been kicked out. And the Bible actually mentioned this. Psalm 96. Turn to Psalm quick. We have a little bit of time. Turn to Psalm 96, verse 10. Again, I love that God has planted all this throughout the Bible. It's always been part of the plan, hidden all throughout the other 65 books of the Bible. Revelation didn't make it up. It's just kind of a collection, right? Psalm 96, verse 10, talks about this moment to rejoice because God is going to take his kingdom, right? Satan will be defeated. Psalm 96, verse 10, say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Yes, the world is established. It shall never be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. Look at this. Let the heavens be glad. That's like celebrate. Let the earth rejoice. Let the sea roar and all that fills it. Let the field exult and everything in it. Then shall all the trees of the forest sing for joy before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. Now, it's really interesting there, because in that one, it's a fuller sense. You notice he told the heavens and the earth and trees on all them to rejoice. But in here, he says, O heavens, you who dwell in them, rejoice. So they're rejoicing. But woe to you, O earth and sea. This is a little bit different than that psalm. That Psalm saw it in the fuller aspect. Why? Because remember, I just told you, we're only halfway there. Although God has done this, he is reigning. It's going to take 3.5 years to tell the earth to rejoice. Because it's going to be awful for 3.5 years. So at this moment, heaven cannot tell the earth to rejoice because they still got it bad for 1,260 or more days, right? They still have, so that's why there's a little bit of difference in that prophecy. So you can look at these and say, hey, this isn't done yet. You can look at the psalm and look at this and say, hey, there's something wrong here because the earth's not rejoicing over here. And it said it was going to rejoice over here. That's a sign we're not done yet. It has come, but the process is still underway. Why to the earth and sea? Because that's the physical world, the physical dimensions. There's joy in heaven, but there's distress on earth. Why? Because imagine this. Imagine somebody think about this. Think about how a landlord would think of this. Some landlord evicts a person because they're not paying rent. They get evicted. And they have nowhere to live, so this other landlord gets them. They're like, oh, great, now I have this problem on my hands. Now they're not going to pay her. Now they're going to cause all these fights and all this chaos, right? So that's why you see this all the time. If somebody gets removed from a problem or somebody gets kicked out and nobody else wants them, like, nope, keep them out of here. I don't want them. That's what's going on here. The earth's like, we don't want Satan. Now the earth has Satan. Full-blown Satan. He's not going back to the heavens and fighting with the angels anymore. He's going to be fighting with humans. So woe to the earth and sea is right. No coincidence. We're also going to see the earth and the sea. You're going to see the beasts yet that come out. The one beast will come out of the sea. That'll be the Antichrist. The other one will come from the earth. That'll be the false prophecy. You see this earth and sea. The devil says, for the devil has come down to you, because of course Satan lost his heavenly access, and that this is where the fury is going to come in. The reason the Great Tribulation is so great, it's not random. Like, why are the last 3.5 years awful? Well, of course, yeah, the agreement will be broken and stuff, but it's really because he gets kicked out of heaven. That's why all hell breaks loose on earth. It's because Satan is kicked out of heaven. And it reminds me of this. This is, if you are a competitive person, everybody who's competitive hates to lose. The worst part of losing is when the game's not over yet, but you know you lost, right? It's like fourth quarter, you're down by 30, and there's 2 minutes left, but you have to play, and you're furious. And sometimes things out of anger can happen, penalties, all kinds. Like, for example, I used to play people online in Madden, and it's a football game. When you play, these situations would happen. Somebody would call timeout, even though it's a blowout. They call timeout, they'd waste your time, then they jump off sides, then they do pass interference in the play. Well, they're just stalling. They're mad, and they're frustrated, and they're getting their frustrations out on you. This does happen in sports. You'll see penalties happen at the end of games because of frustrations happening, right? That's what's happening here. He knows the game's over. He lost, but he still has to play in the game. That's frustrating when you know you lost. So you go into destructive mode. You go into anger and chaos. And that's what's happening. I don't want to be around him when he's like that. And that's what's going to happen. So woe to the earth and sea. You got an angry devil. He just got kicked out. He's mad. Sorry, guys. This is your problem for the next 3.5 years. But God's conquered. So hey, if you're down there, it's all right. He conquered. It's going to be a little ugly. But God has conquered, right? Because in his great wrath, it does say great wrath because he knows his time is short. And I read it earlier in Daniel 12. It did say, at that time shall rise Michael the great prince, who turned people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never been seen since there was a nation. That's this. Because Satan has never, so these wars going on now, they seem bad. It would be a lot worse if Satan couldn't get to the heavens and he was down here fighting it with them. It would be a lot worse. So it's going to get pretty bad, right? He knows his time is short. So you can see heaven's rejoicing, earth is in woe, it's not good. What's interesting, you have the same event, but different effects. So it's the same thing, but depending on if you're happy or sad about things, depends on your situation, right? Just like, hey, when Christ comes back, we get excited to know it sounds weird. I'm not like a doomsday, like the world's going to end. I don't want that, But we get excited the world's going to end because Christ is going to return. Talk to a person who doesn't believe in Christ about the world ending, way different attitude. Way different. No, I don't want the world. No way. I don't want this to end. Like, we want it. This is awful. There's something better. But to them, there isn't something better. There's something a lot worse, right? That's why the same event can have different aspects. Rejoice, heavens. Woe to you on earth. That's like, hey, Christ has conquered Satan. Rejoice, saints. Woe to you, earth dwellers, who do not believe in Christ. It's going to be bad. But yes, celebrate for us. Same event, two different reactions. That's what's going on here. Satan is in his fury, and that covers the war in heaven. Seems like a complex topic, but when you break it down, you can actually understand what's going on by using the Bible as your help. Does anybody have any comments, questions, thoughts they had? Yes, Paul, go ahead.
Since there is no hell now.
Yeah.
is there a heaven now? And
oh yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
If I die now, am I going to instantly be in heaven?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a really deep question. All right, so he said there's no hell now. There's no lake of fire now yet. It's being prepared for them. So is there a heaven now? So there is a heaven, because that's where the Satan's at. There's the heavens, the angels, and there is this earthly realm, and there's a place of the dead, but there isn't the hell in that sense. So what he's picking up on, Paul's picking up on something. There's usually a pattern. God is very balanced. If there's no hell yet, is there no heaven yet? And no, there is no eternal heaven yet. That's the new heaven and the new earth. So there will be a new worse hell, lake of fire, and there will be a new better heaven, the ones we have where the angels are at now. There will be a new better earth than what we're at now. It'll be very much like this, but in perfect form. Now the other question is an interesting one. When we die, when we go to heaven, instantly it says, absent from the body, present with the Lord. So the basic, most simple answer I can give you for time's sake is yes. You will be in some heavenly realm, some spiritual realm with Christ. Now, there's a debate. Will you be in some side room? Will you be in some place, your own little mansion? Will we be all together? Or will you get sent right? Do we wake up right at the resurrection? There's a debate about that. No matter who's right, if you get held in this holding room or we get slingshotted here, no matter what, the answer is always when you die, you're with Jesus forever and everything's good. It's never bad. There's no bad situation. You are in the heavenly realm, not here. And then later on, we will all come back to this earth for 1,000 years, live in a kingdom. It'll be good to accept. There'll still be some sin. And then after that, so that's kind of wild to think. You got to remember that. We're going to live for 1,000 years in perfect bodies together. All of us will be hanging out for 1,000 years. We haven't even, think about that. We haven't even done 100 years together yet. And that we'll do 1,000 years together. And then after that, we'll get the new heaven and the new earth. So that's it's mind-blowing of all the things yet to come. That's why Satan will get locked up eventually for 1,000 years. Yeah, Matt.
So, I don't want to jump ahead to Revelation 20.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, but the Lamb's Book of Life. And
yes.
I was taught there's also like a book of your records.
Records, yeah, the life review kind of thing.
We will be held accountable.
Yes.
Which is in Scripture. So you're going to talk about that.
Oh yes.
By the end of the year, I maybe.
Yeah, maybe. It might be 2027 actually. For that one. That's true.
You mentioned the Book of Truth in Daniel, which is also prophecy. In this situation, did you study what the Book of Truth?
I've done it a while ago. You could do a whole study of all these books, the ones you can be blotted out of, but the Book of Truth. So I have to look into it because I'm not sure. Sometimes there's synonymous things, like sometimes they'll say like the staff of Moses, the staff of Aaron, and then sometimes it can be the same thing. So I don't look, but it does have to do with some kind of prophecy.
Titled and
Yep. So there must be
mentioned twice.
And what's really cool, this is where. I don't tell people you have to go read these, but this is where the Second Temple writings come into place. So you can find other Jewish writings from the Second Temple era that'll expand on a lot of these topics that they just were commonplace back then. Like if we were talking about the Book of Life, Book of Truth, it would maybe have been taught and understood among them. So sometimes reading those Apocrypha books will give you a full understanding. I'll have to study on if there's any difference between that and the other books. And I know there are a handful of them.
I think there's another book mentioned in Malachi.
Yeah, because there's a handful of crowns, handful of books. It gets really, you can keep going deeper and deeper and deeper into this stuff. Okay. But yes, that's a great one. That's a good study to do, the books. Maybe we'll do that, the books of truth, the books of life, all that stuff. That's great. Yeah, Dave.
From Genesis till this point now in Revelation, Satan's been skipping along doing his thing.
Yeah.
Free reign to accuse, destroy, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't he yet, from this point on, still doing God's finished work here on earth, and he doesn't even know that?
That's the best part. The best part about Satan, and that's kind of the funny thing is, you didn't go back here. He killed those saints. He killed the martyrs, and they defeated him with that. So think about that. Satan got defeated by killing them. Killing the ones he killed was defeated, according to what this says. So you can see what Dave's getting at. Everything's backwards. Satan thought he was sending people to hell. Of course he was. When he accuses people that don't believe in Christ, he got to send them to hell in his mind, right? But it didn't work on us. But he was really being defeated. All part of God's plan. He killed Jesus, thinking he was going to wipe him out. That was part of the trap, part of the plan. Same thing here. He's sent down here, and he's probably thinking in his mind, well, at least cause turmoil here. And God goes, good. That's what I want you to do. Because these people need judged. And just like I judged Israel with Assyria, just like I judged Judah with Babylon, I'm going to judge the earth dwellers with you. And what David's saying is true. Satan is actually, this is part of his job. He didn't know this in his job description, but God had this part of his plan. That's how he will judge the earth dwellers through this wrath that I would not want to be around for. So yeah, Satan can't ever escape. Every time Satan kicks back, that's part of the script and he doesn't know it. Could you imagine trying to make somebody mad? You're so mad you just want to go against them. Every time you find out you're always following their plan, everything you did, that would be aggravating, right? That's the feeling of Satan, but he will be defeated, utterly defeated. Well, thanks again, everybody. Make sure to read ahead. Not sure if I'll be here next week, depending on if Jade's here or not, if she has a baby. But Matt is on standby. At some point, we will finish Revelation. We'll jump back into it. But go ahead and read ahead. Read the rest of Revelation 12. Go ahead to 13. Have a great week. Until next time, keep your lamps trimmed and burning. With verse 13 picking back up here. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. So now it says when the dragon saw, so this is full awareness, right? This is making, he knows his time is short. When he saw, he got thrown down, I'm just imagining, it's in my mind, he stands up like what happened? And then he realized, I can't get back into heaven, right? So when he saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he had been expelled, right? We're going to see, he starts to pursue the woman, right? So you're going to start to see this whole war. He just had war in heaven, right? And he was defeated by Michael and his angels. So now he's going to go to war on earth. He's going to focus everything. He can't do anything in heaven. Now he's going to war on earth. He's still in war mode, right? So that's what's happening. And it says he pursued the woman. Since he had seen he was thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman. Of course, we know that woman is Israel from studying, right? But pursued, it literally means like a relentless chase or a hunt. He was hunting down women, hunting down Israel. So this target is Israel. And we would have known about this. Turn to Jeremiah chapter 30. Jeremiah chapter 30 and go to verse number 7. So he's pursuing the woman. He gets thrown out of the earth, says he's pursuing the woman who had given birth to the male child, which again, we had already done our homework the past couple of weeks. We know this to be Israel, and referring to giving birth is to Jesus Christ. But the target is Israel. In Jeremiah in chapter 30, Jeremiah was prophesied about this. Jeremiah chapter 30, verse number 7. Here's what mine says. Jeremiah 30, verse 7. Alas, that day is so great, there is none like it. So it's talking about this tribulation. It is a time of distress for Jacob, yet he shall be saved out of it. So, any Bible scholars out there, what is Jacob in the Bible had another name? What was it? Israel, right? So, you could also say, this is a time of distress for Israel, yet he shall be saved out of it. So here you could see the focus, exactly what Jeremiah wrote about. It would be a terrible time for Israel. It's going to be a terrible time for everybody on earth, right? But it's going to be a terrible time for Israel because this is the 70th week of Daniel, and everything is pivoted back onto them. So it's going to be a terrible time, a time of Jacob's trouble. And here's the thing about that, which is really helpful, is Jacob. So Israel, the church is sometimes, church in Israel, the spiritual Israel thing, there's that whole debate. But there's never, the term Jacob is never used for the church ever. It's only ever used for the nation of Israel. So that is specifically there talking about the nation of Israel, just from that clue there. So it's going to be an intense time for Israel. So basically, Satan has turned his attention. He couldn't get the child. He couldn't get Jesus when he was born and the ascension. So now he's turning his attention to Israel. And remember, this also refers to the rapture because we are the body of Christ, Jesus Christ, who ascended. We are going to be raptured, and he's not able to get the church, so then he's going to pivot to Israel, right? That's what this is kind of hitting at here. He's going to be so furious, he'll pivot and focus on Israel this time, and anybody else, obviously, who follows Christ. But it's really focused on Israel, and it doesn't just say, or the woman, pursued the woman. Very clear, John is to say, who had given birth to the male child. Now, we already know this is Jesus, so why do we need to know this again? The reason he's probably repeating it is to show that Satan's hatred is rooted in Jesus. Even though we keep saying Israel, 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 this is all focused on Israel now. It's to wake them up to Jesus. But he's not really hateful to Israel just because they're Israel. He's hateful because it's part of God's plan, and Christ is going to come back and rule over this nation of Israel. So this is really all about still the male child. He just couldn't grab the male child. It's kind of like, you see people, they're mad at somebody and the person gets away so they hurt the next person next to him. That's kind of how this is going. He really wants Jesus, but Jesus is gone. He took off, so now he's focusing on Israel because of Jesus. It's not really about Israel. It's still about Jesus. That's our clue. That's why it's there. If it wasn't there, I'd say, oh, he just hates Israel too. But this is really about because she gave birth to the male child. That's what this is all about. That's why she's the enemy, and she's part of God's plan because he promised in the end to wake them up. Satan's read Romans 9 through 11. He knows it just like we do, and that's why. Because this is really about Genesis chapter 3. Remember, this whole thing's about Genesis chapter 3, really. This is Satan and God at war with Adam, or Eve, the serpent, or the seed of Eve and the seed of the serpent. That's what's about to unfold here. We're going to eventually turn to the seed of the serpent here in a little bit. But it's this conflict going on, really. So you can see here, Israel, from this verse we learn, Israel obviously is going to remain central to end times prophecy, but the only reason being because they're associated with Jesus, right? And we also know, and you can see this throughout the Bible, you see this throughout the world. This is another thing we can learn. When an enemy often misses an attack, he'll redirect his attack to people around them. We see that happen. That's how Satan works. When Satan has you as a target, and he can't get you, he might shift to something around you, right? Because he can't get to Jesus, so he's going to what's precious, right? The people that he promised to save, so he's going to go after them. And you can see he's redirecting his fight and attack. But, look at this, but the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and half a time. Again, at face value, this sounds so strange. This serpent's trying to eat this woman who had a baby, and the baby got away and was able to fly away in the sky, and now he's going to eat. But now this woman flies away on wings of an eagle. What is going on? Well, very confusing if you haven't read your Bible, but we've read our Bibles, and we're going to go back and reflect on this. First, but the woman was given. What does that mean? But there's a divine intervention, right? So Satan, this is his plan, and Satan's going to attack her, but God has different plans, and God trumps Satan, right? This shows there's going to be divine intervention. It's exactly what we see. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle. Now, this is symbolic imagery. I don't think that like all the Israelites, people in Israel will like have these wings or that birds will pick them up. Maybe God will do that. I don't know. I don't really think that's what it's actually getting at here, because turn to Exodus chapter 19. Exodus chapter 19. A lot of times in the Bible, when it talks about things like, for example, the eagle here, it doesn't always mean obviously a physical, actual eagle. It's more like a supernatural deliverance we're going to see, where God supernaturally will deliver people. He uses the terms of eagle. Exodus chapter 19, and then look at verse number 3. You can see this imagery all the way back in Exodus. Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, there it is, and tell the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians. This is God talking. And how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. And yet you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. Interesting. That was Exodus chapter 19, right? That was when God delivered Israel out of Egypt, right? He sent Moses to deliver them out of Egypt. And he's again going to do this. This is a pattern. This is the Exodus pattern happening again. God is using the exact same language, saying, remember the last time? Remember when you guys were in Egypt and I saved you then? I'm going to do the same thing for you guys now, thousands of years later. That's what he's saying, using the exact same language that we see here, because God is going to repeat the pattern. We just saw the Genesis pattern. We see the Genesis pattern of chapter 3. We're going to see the Exodus pattern here as well in this section of the chapter here. But the emphasis is really here on the fact that the 2 wings of the great eagle, the fact they escaped to the wilderness is not on their own. That's saying like they needed some supernatural thing, because people don't have wings of eagles, and we don't usually get transported by eagles. It's not a transportation service where we're at, right? So this is a supernatural thing. God is the one who is rescuing. That's why, but doesn't have to say God, because based on the context, we know that God is intervening. It's God's protection. Go to Deuteronomy 32. If you're still in Exodus, you're pretty close. Go to Deuteronomy chapter 32. Again, this is the time of Moses, and they are in the wilderness. They're about to go, Deuteronomy, this is the end of Deuteronomy. They're about to go into the promised land, and Moses is giving his final speech. Deuteronomy chapter 32, and go to verse number 10. We got more proof of this. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 10. He found him in a desert land, and in the howling waste of the wilderness. He encircled him, he cared for him, he kept him as the apple of his eye, like an eagle that stirs up its nest that flutters over its young, spreading out its wings, catching them, beating them on its pinions. The Lord alone guided him. No foreign God was with him. Isn't that interesting? Again, he's talking about Israel and Egypt. He even mentions the wilderness there, and not much later, like an eagle that stirs its nest, spreading out its wings, right? The Lord alone guided him. This is the exact same language, so this is not new. This is not some weird vision. Now maybe he got this vision, but this is not some weird brand new thing that we can't figure out. This is actually a repeat. The Bible, if you haven't figured out now, is a lot of repeats, a lot of reruns, right? If you're familiar with reruns, it's a bunch of reruns, and if you understand this, you can understand the original, you can predict what's coming next. It's kind of predictable in a certain way. And if you miss it, God's sending us back here. Like, go back to Exodus. If you know what this is about, if you want to know, go back to when Israel was brought through the wilderness, and you learn how they were miraculously brought through in all those ways. That is what God is getting at, that God protects his people. Psalm 55, we see similar reference to wings, okay? Psalm 55, I'll read this for time's sake. Psalm 55, verses 5 through 8, says, my heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death fall upon me. Fear and trembling come upon me, and horrors overwhelm me. And I say, oh, that I had wings. Like a dove, I would fly away and be at rest. Yes, I would wander far away. I would lodge in the wilderness. That's, by the way, that's Psalm 55. You want to read that. It talks about if somebody in trouble, if they could just only have these wings to fly away and they would hide in the wilderness. Isn't that interesting language? All spread throughout your Bibles, all throughout the Old Testament, this has actually been in there. And then John's just told to write it as a reference point for us, essentially, right? So it says, so that she, to the place where she is, hold on, let's go back. But the woman was given two wings of the great eagle so that she might fly from the serpent. Of course, the serpent being Satan, flying from the serpent, meaning a separation from danger, right? Protection from a direct attack, right? Into the wilderness. Now, if you're in Revelation 12 still, look back at verse number 6, 8 verses ago. And the woman fled into the wilderness. There it is, where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. So it's tying this directly to verse 6, what we already learned about earlier. So it's tying back to this thing before, that she is going to be protected in the wilderness and nourished for 1,260 days, which again we'll get here for a time and times and half a time. Now there's a lot of debate. Where in the wilderness are they going to go hide? And some people probably think, well, we can't know, because then if we know the hiding spot, we'll be able to find it. Well, I think you can still know it, because by then, if you notice in prophecy, Daniel was told things very clearly, and then later people forget about it. And that's usually what happens in prophecy, they'll forget about it. But I do believe there's a good chance, you've probably heard this before, that they are going to go to a place that we modern day, well, in ancient times it was called Selah, S-E-L-A, or Bozrah, B-O-Z-R-A-H. But today, it's in the modern nation of Jordan, and it's called Petra. You've probably heard of Petra, okay? And the name Bozrah, the ancient name of Petra in Jordan. By the way, if you want to look up some amazing things where I think they're going to hide out, you can actually go see probably where they're going to live. If you type in Petra, Jordan, and go on YouTube, you can watch a video. You can actually, I've done tours on my Oculus before with it. It's amazing if you see these structures that were carved out and stuff that are already there. But Bozrah literally translates to the word sheepfold. That's another clue, because a sheepfold is an enclosure designed to protect sheep from predators. Isn't that interesting? The whole name of this place, Bozrah, means to protect sheep, right? So, but why am I picking Bozrah? I can't just pick a random spot, and these commentators can't pick random spots. So go to Micah chapter 2. This is our first clue. We have 3 clues. And maybe we're not right, maybe we're not, and we won't be here anyway, I don't think, but it's fun to know. It's fun to know that we can know probably where the Israelites are going to hide. The Jews are going to hide safely, that God will protect them. Micah chapter 2, verse number 2. I'm going to read the King James Version, is the one you have to kind of get the language with Bozrah on it to get the clue. So here I'll read in the King James. Micah chapter 2, verse number 2. It says, I will surely assemble, O Jacob, all of thee. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together as the sheep of Bozrah. As the flock in the midst of their fold, they shall make great noise by reason of the multitude of men. So in Micah chapter 2, he gets this prophecy that he will take, there it is, Jacob or Israel, both mentioned there, as the sheep of Bozrah, right? Bozrah, remember the sheepfold. Bozrah being this place in Jordan. Go to Isaiah chapter 16. Isaiah chapter 16, these are other clues. Isaiah chapter 16, verse 1. This one talks about the end of this time period. This is going to be a prophecy about when Israel is leaving the wilderness at the end of the Great Tribulation, this 3.5 year period. This time and times and half a time, at the end of this is what this prophecy is about, Isaiah 16. Isaiah 16, verse number 1, it will be. And it's amazing just to see. Now this time it's going to be called Selah. S-E-L-A, because before Bozrah, remember, all these towns' names change all the time. Now it's called Petra. But it used to be called Selah, S-E-L-A. Look at Isaiah, first verse of chapter 16. Send the lamb to the ruler of the land from Selah by way of the desert to the mount of the daughters of Zion. Isn't that interesting? So there's language of the lamb. Send the lamb, that's Jesus' language. Selah is this Bozrah place, this Petra place, by way of the desert to the mount. Almost talking about coming from this place back to Jerusalem, which is what's going to happen to the Jews. They're not going to hang out in the wilderness forever. It's only going to be 3.5 years. Then they got to go back, which there's a lot of talk about how that'll happen. And stay in Isaiah if you're there. Now go chapter 63. Isaiah chapter 63, the first verse again, talking about the same period. Isaiah, same prophet, gets the same language. This time, again, it's going to use the term Bozrah instead of Selah. It's the same Exodus pattern we're going to see. Exodus 63, verse number 1. Here's what it says. Isaiah 63, verse 1. Who is this who comes from Edom in crimsoned garments from Bozrah? He who is splendid in his apparel, marching in the greatness of his strength. It is I, speaking in righteousness, mighty to save. Now, who is Isaiah talking about there? I think we know pretty well there. There's crimson stained garments. Crimson, that's red. Blood, we always say that with crimson, right? From Bozrah. Later it says, it is I, mighty to save. That's Jesus Christ himself. Isaiah is getting a prophecy again of this end times, it seems like, and he's mentioning Bozrah. He mentions that he's going to save them, out of here. It comes from Edom in crimson garments, marching, and he's the one to save, just like we read earlier in chapter 16. That is why we believe when they get hidden in the wilderness, they'll be hidden at the ancient place of Bozrah or Selah, which is now modern Petra. Now, it could be wrong. Maybe that's not the case. But when you look this place up, it looks prepared. It looks prepared like it could be where they're going to be, which is really interesting. But the whole point of the wilderness isn't about where they're going to be at, although we could maybe guess, but about why they're there. What is the wilderness in the Bible? Well, the wilderness is often a time, a place of testing. Remember, Jesus had to go out into the wilderness for 40 days, right? The Israelites were in the wilderness for 40 years. So there's this time of testing, also a time of protection, because they were protected, right? Jesus survived it, and so did the Israelites, and also dependence on God. So when you're out in the wilderness, you can't really go to your local grocery store for stuff, right? You can't go for anything. You've got to depend on God for everything. So when you're in the wilderness, you have nothing and you depend on God. So it's going to, what is the whole point of this, by the way, for Israel? It is not to crush and kill Israel. That's not what the tribulation is about. It's to wake them up, to get them to depend on the one Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, who they're blind to. He's opening their eyes and getting them to depend on him. This is the way he's doing it. He's done this before with Israel. This is not new. This is the Exodus pattern again. But they're going to be safe under God's care. That's what he's doing here. It's not to destroy them, but to preserve them. Because it says to a place where she is to be nourished, right? So sustained or cared for is what that means. God's provision, whether it's going to be manna or whatever it's going to be. But this is not just an escape and saves you for a day or two. This is ongoing preservation for 3.5 years. They're going to be fed however God's going to feed them and get water however God's going to give it to them. This will be ongoing, just like it has been in the past. This is nothing new for God, right? He's done this before. He'll do it for a time and times and half a time. There again, all the different ways we've been seeing this broken down. Earlier, like I said, in verse number 6, it had, 1,260 days, I think. And I told you about the 360-day calendar. It comes out to be 3.5. Here's the other way to say it. Time equals a year in this language. So a time, 1 year, times 2 years, half a time, half a year is what that means in that language. So 1 year plus 2 year plus half a year is 3.5, right? Also known in other places earlier, last chapter, I think it was also called 42 months. 42 divided by 12 is also 3.5. So again, I say this often, but if you think this is symbolic, the Holy Spirit probably wants to reach out and smack you a little bit because like he said it 3 different times, like, or so many ways, 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days. If you guys don't think that's literal, I don't even know how to help you at this point. Like that's pretty clear, right? Daniel 7, it's actually talked about this time, by the way. He shall speak words against the Most High. He shall wear out the saints of the Most High. He shall think to change the times of the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. The exact same language that we saw in Daniel chapter 7 with the beast, which maybe we'll have time to get into. But what do we learn from this verse here? Well, that divine deliverance is often supernatural, but it's not always obvious. So although we think it's going to look like, we expect when we get these miracles and we pray to God, we expect him to answer as if an eagle's going to come down and pick us up, right? But sometimes he answers it just through the person down the street coming and doing something that looks really ordinary, right? So I don't think it sounds extraordinary, but it's going to maybe look ordinary because I bet if you watch the wilderness, other than the Red Sea, and you can probably see some other things, sometimes God will make things look very ordinary, but he's rescuing you. And he's doing that all the time in our lives today. This is a more extreme version, but even then, he's not going to pick him up with eagle's wings. It's going to probably look fairly natural, but it's going to be a supernatural protection that might look natural, which is very similar to what we see in our lives, right? Verse number 15 gets more interesting here. So what does the serpent do? The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. So the serpent, again, we know that's Satan. He poured water like a river out of his mouth. So water like a river out of his mouth. Why out of his mouth? That's important. And we're going to see a lot in Revelation. It's talking about the mouth. Well, the mouth is a place of influence, right? That's where you speak. You can have influence, you can command, you can have, put out commands or directives. You can also deceive. It's also used to tell lies, right? So I think all of those are going to come into play. When this flood comes out of his mouth, again, I don't think Satan is going to come down, he's trapped on earth, is going to open his mouth and have this like water ability. I don't think that's what it's talking about, although we'll get to that, what it might be. I think the part of the mouth, what it's talking about, is that he's going to use deception and lies through his system, right? And the influence that he's going to have. And it says water like a river, right? An overwhelming rapid force, probably like a water that's rushing, like the rapids where you go whitewater rafting, right? That kind of a thing. Water, it's going to be destructive and it's meant to destroy. It's not just a stream of water for her to swim in. This is to wipe her out, right? Now here's possible interpretations. What is this flood? It's going to sweep her with a flood, these water like a river. What is it going to be? Well, it could be, what's really interesting, there's this one really random one. This is part of it maybe, and maybe it has nothing to do with it, but there's a chance, maybe there's actual flood with the weather, I don't know. Because the angelic beings, they can have control over the weather. We'll see that later in Revelation. God gives them abilities. Perhaps they bring torrential downpour and a flash flood. That might be part of it. And if that even does happen, we're not even sure that's going to happen. Because I don't think it's really focusing on the literal aspect of the flood or the water. Potentially, they'll send flash floods in part of the attack. I don't know. There might be some water aspect, and I'll get to that probably because of the Red Sea. So if there is going to be some flash flood from this, it would be reflecting back on the Red Sea situation. But a bigger thing will probably be deception. There'll be a lot of propaganda. We're going to see a lot of anti-Semitic lies. We're already starting to see that happen, actually, by the way. Anti-Semitism is beginning now. And, it's always around, but it's going to grow into a monster to where it will be very mainstream and push. I think there's going to be a lot of deception, a lot of propaganda. We're used to that today. We see a lot of that today. It's going to be even worse in the end times. The deception and the propaganda will be so bad, you won't even have your YouTubes and your rabbit holes to go down. There'll be nobody telling the truth anymore. You won't be able to find it. So there's that. But even bigger, and I think the main thing it's talking about, I think propaganda will happen. I think there could be some crazy storms that take place, or whatever maybe. But I think what it's really talking about is a massive, overwhelming military attack. To the point the Antichrist, we're going to get to him, he has this peace with Israel for 7 years it's supposed to last. 3.5 years in, he breaks this deal. And I think he's not only going to break it, he's going to send directives to his entire military force, his Air Force, his Navy. Every Jew you see, every person in Israel you see, wipe them out. And he's going to send the military after him. That's what I believe. Could you imagine a whole military attack on a group of people? Not just on their lead. Because right now, by the way, think about this. We still have these, we pretend that we have these like laws, international war laws, where you can't go after women, children, innocent civilians. You have to go after these certain areas. That's going to be out the window. We have never seen wars where you're allowed to target civilians. When we see about bombs on the TV, they do hit civilians, but they're not supposed to be aiming for them. They're supposed to be only aiming at specific areas. That will be gone, I believe. I believe the propaganda will be so bad, it'll be something like worse than you've seen from Hitler and worse from Haman in the past in the Bible, where they're going to tell you that Israel is the cause of all of your evil, all these Jews, and the only way is to get rid of all of them and all their evil. They won't bow down to me. They will not play a part of this. You need to kill them all. I'm sending my military, and if you guys see them, shoot them. It's probably going to be the directives. That's the propaganda that's going to play into it. That's going to be the military. And why do I think all this is going to happen? Because it's happened before. Pharaoh did this. You guys all know this. Pharaoh did this. God was protecting them, and Satan attacked them. It was Satan. Remember, we've been reading this. All of these kingdoms have been run by Satan. That's why the dragon looks like it does. It represents all kingdoms. And remember, I said that Egypt's probably the first one out of those 7 that it counts. So that was Satan. And what did he do? What did Satan do through Pharaoh? He pursued the woman in the wilderness, and God had to rescue her through the water. She was trapped at the Red Sea, brought her through the waters. And who were they escaping from? A big military attack. He sent the whole military after this group of people, and the women and the children, and said, kill them all. So this has happened before. That's why I know it'll happen again. And the Antichrist will do something like this through the power of Satan. That's why I believe another sign of the end times. I don't think Israel's perfect. I don't agree with everything the government does over there. But a big sign is you're seeing the prep work. It's not going to be really hard to... I used to think it was going to be hard to convince America to hate Israel. It's not. It's already done. It's already complete. The work's done. So we are very close to this, but that's what I believe it's talking about here. After that woman, again, it's Israel to sweep her away with a flood to total annihilation. Have you ever heard of that before? To total annihilation of Israel. It's what you hear. I've actually started to hear Americans say this. There's actually a guy running for Congress in Florida right now that said he would go to war and kill Israelis. He's running for Congress. Look this up. This is true. So they want to wipe out. They're talking about, there's Americans now that says, I'm not saying we should kill the Jews, but they shouldn't have a country of Israel. That's our real narrative right now. These are our real narratives. So when people say you're standing for Israel, it's not like that you're standing for all their bombing. It's that their right to exist as a nation, because the whole world's going to want to wipe them out again soon. It's already happening, and it's in America now. So like it's worse than I've ever seen it before. But this is remember, this is all biblical. This is what Haman did. Read the book of Esther. That's what this is. He tried to kill him with a flood then. That was Haman and the gallows. Remember, he ended up getting hung on it because God can always turn the things. Hitler, same thing. He gave the directives, kill all the Jews. If they're hiding in your house, I want to see them. I want to kill them all. I don't care if it's women and children. We got to kill them all. This has been a pattern. This is not new. This has happened over and over and over again, starting all the way back with Pharaoh, right? And it's going to continue on, and that's why we see it. Go to Psalm 124. Psalm 124, this is interesting again. This was prophesied in the Psalms, the same passage again. So what's neat about this psalm again is prophecy is pattern. So again, it's already happened. It's going to happen again. This is just more proof of what I just said. What I told you about was prophesied in the Psalms, which are already over 1,000 years old in our time. Psalm 124. If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, let Israel now say, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side when people rose against us, then they would have swallowed us up alive when their anger was kindled against us. Then the flood would have swept us away. The torrent would have gone over us. Look at that flood language. Then over us would have gone the raging waters. Blessed be the Lord who has not given us as prey to their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. So there it was. You guys have no idea probably. In your psalm, this story was buried in there. This whole situation was buried in there because it actually happened before. When you read Psalms, it seems like a reflection, because it was, but it was also a prophecy. That's what's so cool about Psalms. It's actually a very prophetic book if you look at it. There's a lot of prophecies in the Psalms. So you can see this is over. It was mentioned in Exodus. It was mentioned in Deuteronomy. It's mentioned in your Psalms. So this is at least the 4th time. And there's probably more I'm not even listing. I didn't have time to go through my entire Bible like with a fine-tooth comb. Didn't have time for that this week. But you can see how it's just always been the plan. This is not new, and it's not hard to figure out because we have it elsewhere in the Bible. And even Daniel chapter 9 talks about destruction, these 70 weeks. It says in verse 26, after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. That's in Daniel 9, right before the abomination of desolation. It's talking about all that stuff. It even says the end shall come with a flood. Daniel tied it with this. This is why these words, these anchors are all important, because you can figure out what's going on here. Let's look at verse number 16. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. This one is another interesting one. But the earth came to the help of the woman. But here again, another divine reversal. God is stepping in. Satan thinks he's going to, win, but the woman again survives. The earth opened its mouth, it says, right? So the earth is personified. And, we've been having this language of the eagle flying, the dragon. You have this earth opening up and swallowing the river. But what's interesting, again, there might be some water aspects to this. And there might be some little aspects. And this is going to sound crazy to you guys. I think the dragon is symbolism. I don't think that's real. I think that Satan is referring to. I don't think there's going to be a real bird. But I actually think, this is crazy, I actually think the literal part of this, one of the literal parts, is that the earth is going to swallow them. I know I sound insane, but I did my homework. Because if you go to Numbers chapter 16, go back to Numbers chapter 16. It sounds crazy, and maybe not. Maybe this is symbolic. But this is why you got to have your Bible. I think there's some literal truth in here. Because we know the earth isn't really alive, but it does respond to the commands of God, because that's how this whole thing came to be. God speaks and creation responds. That's how he sends floods. That's how he holds winds back. Right? That's how he has all these things. Numbers chapter 16. Let's go to verse number 25. Remember, this is when Korah, Dathan, and Abiram are saying, hey, why is Moses in charge? We should be in charge. We're Levites. Who said you could be in charge? They're challenging, not really Moses, they're challenging God, really, right? Look, it says, then Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spoke to the congregation, saying, depart, please, from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing of theirs, lest you be swept away with all their sins. So they got away from the dwelling of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of their tents, together with their wives, their sons, and their little ones. And Moses said, hereby you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, and that it has not been of my own accord. If these men die as all men die, if they're visited by the fate of all mankind, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates something new, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into Sheol, then you shall know that these men have despised the Lord. And as soon as he had finished speaking all these words, the ground under them split apart. And the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, with their households and all the people who belonged to Korah and all their goods. So they and all that belonged to them went down alive into Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. Did any of you guys ever read that story and go, that didn't really happen? That was just metaphor and symbolic. That was, No. That was one of the craziest stories I ever read, but I knew it was true because it was in the Bible. It was pretty wild, but there was no symbolism in that. It's happened once, it can happen again. And actually, go to Exodus chapter 15 if you have the time. This is really wild. Exodus chapter 15, go back to the beginning of your books again. This is pretty amazing. Song of Moses. Remember what this is the Song of Moses, Exodus chapter 15, go to verse 8. It uses similar language. Song of Moses talking about celebration, how God has brought them through that Red Sea. Remember the Red Sea? It collapsed on who? The army that was chasing them, right? And it collapsed and killed them. And look what does they say in Moses' song, Exodus 15, verse number 8. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The flood stood up in a heap. The deeps congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue. There it is. I will overtake. I will divide the spoil. My desire shall have its fill of them. I will draw my sword. My hand shall destroy them. You blew with your wind. The sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders? And look at this verse. You stretched out your right hand, and the earth swallowed them. Isn't that interesting? This is all tied to the Exodus. This is all the Exodus story. What Pastor Brad's teaching in Exodus is what's happening here. It's a mirror. It's an exact mirror. And we're getting all this language. This is all old languages you're seeing. They're going to get swallowed up. It's that Exodus connection, right? And it says the dragon had poured from his mouth. John is reminding us, remember this attack is satanic, right? Satanic in origin. Whatever's happening, whether military, whatever, deception, it's all satanic. That's why he repeats, it came from the dragon. Let's try to finish this one up quick. We'll see if we have the time. Verse number 17, then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea. So, of course, Satan becomes furious and mad. Again, why? Because he lost the game, and there's still time on the clock, but the game's over, so he's furious. You know, he's just causing fights now, right? And he went off to make war. He's back to war again. He was doing war in heaven. Now he's doing war on earth because that's where he's trapped, right? He's making war. And he's going to do that through earthly systems, which is a hint to us. He's making war on us today through earthly human government systems. He's been doing it forever, and he's doing it today. He's still attacking us, and he attacks us through people and systems. We're going to see when we get to that. But who is he attacking? The rest of her offspring. The rest of her offspring. So Israel. Who's the rest of Israel's offspring? Most likely other Jewish believers. So, for example, there will be Jewish believers that are connected to the Messiah that might not be in Israel. What if there are Jews in America and Jews in Iceland and Jews in China that come to salvation through the Lord? They're not going to be able to probably get there. They're not going to be able to get to Petra. That's why it says you in the hills of Judea. That's a special group of Jews that are hiding. There's other ones left. And if you remember the propaganda that's going to be out there, Anne Frank kind of stuff, you know what I mean? Hiding. And you're going to have Gentile believers. Remember when Jesus says he comes back and how did you treat my people, the sheep and the goats judgment? It's going to make a lot more sense to you. The other Gentile believers are out there feeding, hiding the Jews, even though they're not safe themselves. But who took care of them? They're going to have to hide out. They're not going to be safe. Which Jews will be safe? There will be Jews that will be safe. The ones you'll find later that take the mark. As long as you worship the beast, you're good. So those Jews are going to be fine. But he's going to talk about these evil Jews who won't even worship, won't even partake in this. You need to kill them all. And they're going to chase them. And when his military gets wiped out, imagine how angry he's going to be when he loses a lot of money in military. He's going to go for all the Jews that are still around. He's going to turn. He went from Jesus to Israel. They're getting away. And now he's going to look at all the other Jews, all believers too, because it does say, and those who hold the testimony of Jesus. But it's very much going to be focused on Israel and the Jews, because if he can wipe them out, he can eliminate God's promise. But there are some Jews that are protected, right? The ones that are here, and also the 144,000, don't forget about them. They're protected. They're out there somewhere as well, which is really, really interesting to think. But anti-Semitism, as you can see, is really going to be a tool in the end, and you can see it really beginning now. It says attacking those who keep the commandments of God. So really, again, why is he attacking them? You can see again behind it, because they follow Jesus. Again, it's attached to Jesus. He hates these Jews, and he hates these believers, and he hates all this, but it's really attached to Jesus, right? They hold firmly, remain loyal to Christ. They hold to the testimony of Jesus. That means the faithful witness of what Jesus has done in their life, and they're not compromising, right? These people are holding true. They're true believers. That's why he hates them, because they represent Jesus Christ. That's what this is all about. So it says he stood on the sand of the sea. And some translations get it wrong. They're going to try to put that John is standing on the sea. Even so, he saw this. But this is talking about the dragon standing on the sea. He's furious. I can imagine, like, you know, if he were a dragon, he'd be blowing smoke and fire out his nostrils, right? But what does the sea stand for? Well, those are usually the chaos, right? The waters of chaos. Also, Gentile nations are from the sea. So he's standing there. And then there's also... you'll see later, he's going to call the beast from the earth, the other beast. But you can see, we're going to pivot into chapter 13. We're going to go right into the Antichrist, the beast you've been hearing about for so long, right? There's two of them, the Antichrist and then the false prophet. But I think what's happening here with this scene, it's almost like a cliffhanger, like if this were a season. Imagine if we put Revelation into season 1, 2, and this is season 12, this is our cliffhanger. It ends, and the credits roll after you see the Jews get in, they get saved, and you see him standing out and looking into the ocean, just furious. And the next scene, if you remember, out of the sea will come the beast. So it's a reflection back on this Antichrist, and this could be a reflection back even before the Great Tribulation. But this whole situation, the Antichrist is almost a continuation of this attack. That he's going to summon, like, all right, now I'm calling out my big guns. God took out my military, he stopped whatever else I did. Now I'm calling out my final kingdom. And that's where the sea language will come from. You'll start to see all that. So this is where Satan's war is heading. You can see how the end times now are starting to shift towards all of these things taking place. It's pretty amazing, actually. Does anybody have, we'll go ahead and stop there, because then we'll get into chapter 13 in a couple weeks, whenever I come back after Jade has the baby. But does anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts based on this or anything else they heard? Dave, go ahead.
This may add 2 or 3 weeks to Revelation.
Yes, all right.
do you think Satan from Genesis to Job when he was the accuser to New Testament when he had Christ in the wilderness, even to this point again in Revelation, does he ever fully understand who Jesus Christ is?
That's a great point. That's a great point. Because the answer would be no, he doesn't really. Although he does know, which is weird because he does know. He sees Christ. He knows who he is. He knows he's going to be conquered. He's read the writing. And so far, he's lost he hasn't won one. He's winless, right? He's winless. He has no wins. Yet he keeps trying to do this. So obviously, if he knew who Christ was, he wouldn't even fight. He'd just say, this is pointless. So in a way, he was saying he knows, but in his actions, he's showing he's not. And it kind of reminds me of, like, it's funny because we rip on Satan all the time. Like, give it up, dude. Like, how many times does God have to whoop your butt until you realize you're not going to get anywhere, right? But then think about this. I was thinking about this, actually. It's funny that you bring this up. I was thinking about this, and it's like, my son, Ross, sometimes he'll be like, hey, Dad, can I have some cookies before, like, after, like, no, you didn't have it. And then he'll ask me again later. And I'll say no, and I never give it to him. And then he'll ask me again, and he'll try to figure out a way to negotiate. And it's like, dude, this never works. But in his mind, one of these times, I'm going to convince Dad to give me the cookies. One of these times, I'm actually going to win. And that's wrong, because I'm the boss. And unless I want him to get it, he'll get it. But he's never going to outdo me. And that's the problem with Satan. He's just like a little kid that I'm going to get Mom and Dad. One of these times, I swear I'm going to do it. I know I never did it before, but this is the time. And you know people like this in your life. It's not even talking about kids and stuff, but you know this is the time they're going to do it, and they failed 100 times, and they didn't change their, you know what is that one saying? Like if you do the same thing and expect the different result, that's insanity, right? But these people that said, I'm going to do it this time, you're like, you did it the same thing, so you're going to fail again, right? That's exactly what's going on. And so no, like in a sense, if Satan knew it, he would stop kicking against the goads, as the Bible says. That's a great point, Dave. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions on all that? All right. Well, thanks again. Matt's going to cover for me next week. And Lord willing, read ahead. We'll be in chapter 13 whenever I come back. And we'll pick up from here. We're going to get into the Antichrist and all that fun stuff. So have a great week. Until next time, keep your lamps trimmed and burning. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. This is the Antichrist we're going to get to. This is the most famous person that people don't even know about Christianity talk about this guy, and they love to talk about him. This is going to be the Antichrist we're going to talk about. But what's really interesting is notice what it said. Starts out, I saw a beast rising out of the sea. It's really interesting. How did 17 end? And he stood on the sand of the sea. So the dragon is standing on the sand of the sea, and next thing you know, out of the sea comes this beast. So they're connected. We can see the connection here. So further says, I saw, so John sees a new figure now. By the way, if you actually start counting all the people, it adds up to 7 different groups of people, because Revelation's full of 7s. But he shows a new figure now that's popped up. He showed the woman, he showed, the dragon, the woman's children, the man, all these things. So now we are getting into this beast that is rising from the sea. And a beast in prophetic literature, as you can imagine, if I called you a beast, you probably wouldn't appreciate it, right? Beast is not a great term, right? It's somebody who's brutal, it's brutality, shows brutality, a lot of power, and also a predator, because beasts are like predators, so very predatory, right? That's how this beast is going to be, because a lot of times beasts refer to kingdoms, kings, rulers, and usually rulers who are empowered by evil. So this goes hand in hand. This is perfect. Basically, this beast is ultimately tied to the Antichrist system. Some people will call this beast the Antichrist himself, right? Like we commonly do probably. Then some people will say, well, this is the Antichrist world empire. The Roman Empire revived, Roman 2.0, could also be interchangeable, but we're definitely going to start to see it. We're focusing on an individual here, but they both can apply here. But what you're going to notice is he's called a beast. What is Jesus called? Jesus is called a lamb. You've got a lamb and a beast. So you can see Revelation's always contrasting the Lord Jesus and Satan, right? The very big contrast of what Satan's doing, who God is and what he does. But what is this beast doing? He's rising out of the sea. Why is rising out of the sea important? Well, we've talked about the sea before. The sea usually symbolizes chaos, right? And that makes sense because, we're very less safe in water than we are in land. There's a lot of chaos. You have no control. So the sea was often used as chaos. And also, the sea could also be used as Gentile nations, right? The nations or the Gentile powers. And again, I believe it is both. I believe it is going to refer to instability, chaos among all of the Gentile nations. He's going to come out of chaos, right? Just think of that. The Antichrist will be born, it's almost like a birth here, he'll be born out of chaos of the nations, which will make sense as we're going to read, right? And even in Isaiah chapter 57, sometimes the wickedness can be associated with the sea. For example, in Isaiah 57 verse 20, it says, "But the wicked are like the tossing sea, for it cannot be quiet, and its waters toss up mire and dirt." So we can see there's wickedness associated possibly with this. But rising out of the sea, this is a really big thing. We got a beast rising out of the sea. Why is this important? Some of you might be reading this, say, this kind of sounds familiar. Maybe I read Revelation, maybe I didn't. But go to Daniel chapter 7. Go to Daniel, and we're going to see today in these next couple verses why Daniel is like, well, Revelation is like the New Testament Daniel. Sometimes we call Daniel the Old Testament Revelation. Really, Revelation is like the New Testament Daniel because it gives up so much stuff that Daniel's already given us. Now, obviously, it's like Ezekiel, Isaiah, Daniel, Hosea, all of them are in here. But you're going to see right here, Daniel saw this one. And we actually were told about this a long time ago. So Daniel chapter 7, and we're going to look at verse number 2. Daniel chapter 7, verse number 2. And look what Daniel says. It says, "Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up, look, the great sea. And four great beasts came out of the sea, different from one another, just like this. The first, now there's four of them, let's look at them. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made it stand on 2 feet like a man, and the man of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful, and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Interesting. I considered the horns, and behold, there came upon them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. So Daniel sees this vision there, chapter 7. And you can kind of hang out in Daniel, because we'll probably come back to Daniel quite a bit there in chapter 7 through 11. We'll pop back in. But he sees this beast, or he doesn't even see a beast. He sees 4 beasts, and they're rising out of the sea just like this one. So you can see that connection going on here, right? And if you know anything about what Daniel saw, it's very closely tied with Daniel chapter 2 and Nebuchadnezzar's vision. But we know about remember the empires Daniel was seeing was Babylon, right? Because Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, that was in his time, right? And then the Medo-Persian Empire, the Persians came, and then the Greeks came, Alexander the Great, and then the Romans came. And we saw that in Daniel chapter 2. Daniel was told that before those people showed up, by the way. That's what's really cool. But we're seeing that's what he saw here, and we're going to get into that. That vision is coming back. So what you read in Daniel, we're finding out this is important again. Remember what Daniel said, because we're talking about that now. We got to see what he was talking about. And look at, if you're in Daniel chapter 7, look down a little further. Let's look at verses 23, actually. Because Daniel even talked about this final kingdom that opposes God and persecuted the saints, just like we've been talking about. Daniel chapter 7, verse 23. This is Daniel talking about the 4th kingdom again. Thus he said, As for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth, and trample it down and break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and he shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and they shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. That's the language you just read about at the end of the other one. Time, times, half a time, the 3.5 years, that whole period, right? We're reading about that. So you can see the 10 horns. You can see this right here. There's 10 horns right here, 10 crowns, 10 diadems. He's talking about 10 kings here. So this is what Daniel saw. He's talking about, and here he's talking about a 4th and final kingdom. We're in Revelation. We're at the end. This would probably be that kingdom we're going to talk about. It's really interesting here. And it says with 10 horns. What are those 10 horns? Remember, horns are power. And often a horn can be a leader, powerful king, which is probably what it means here. So the 10 horns mean the 10 kings. If you ever, I don't know if I mentioned it here on my Wednesday nights, can't remember where I mention things sometimes, but there's a map called the Club of Rome map. You can look it up. It was developed in 1968. If I'm correct, you can fact check me. And this Club of Rome map, it's the Roman Empire basically, but it has 10 nations, or the whole world. You can look it up. The whole world will be split into 10 federated kingdom nations. So we have America and India and China and Russia. That will be gone in the future. I don't know if you knew that or not. There will only be 10 nations in the end of time. And that's what this, Daniel saw it, and now we're seeing it here in Revelation. That's why you see the things go global the way they are today. We are shifting towards the 10 nations. We are shifting away from all these little nations, and we're going to be shifting into the global system at the end. So Daniel had these visions. Now look at this. It said 10 horns, so we know those are probably going to be 10 kings. So the Antichrist is going to run a world government. But imagine them almost like governors. How we have the president, and then we have 50 states with 50 governors. Those would be like 50 horns of the United States with one great horn, or the, being the president or whatever you could say. That's kind of the same kind of thing. So he's got almost like these governors or kings that are going to be over them. So he's going to rule over them. The Antichrist is still the global dictator, but he has these co-regions essentially who are going to help him rule. But now it says 7 heads. What is 7 heads about? Well, later we're told in Revelation, and I mentioned it last time, I think, that these are mountains or kingdoms. And I talked about the 7 kingdoms that started all the way back in Egypt, right, and ran through. And this is the 7th and final kingdom that has oppressed Israel, right? One from Egypt and Assyria and Babylon and Persia and Greece and Rome. And now this is Rome 2.0, number 7. This is the final, the 7th. And 7th, what is 7? Completeness, right? Completeness and fullness of God's plan, right? With 10, and look at, they have 10 diadems on its horns. 10 diadems, remember, diadems are crowns, but not victor's crowns, royal crowns. So they don't have the victory in Christ. Don't get this confused, right? They have crowns, and it's false. They're kings of the world. That's what their crowns are saying. Their kings of the world has nothing to do with being victors in the Lord, right? It's showing they have political sovereignty. They're going to have rule over, like, for example, right now, the region that's broke up with us, like America will be included with Greenland and Canada, if you look at the Club of Rome map. So we would be, and we'd have a leader. So if right now, if it took over and our president, he'd be in charge of Greenland and Canada, according to the region they have. Whether it'll shake out or not, we don't know. But that's how it'll be. So they have these crowns because they're going to be rulers over these areas, even though the Antichrist will rule over them. But these crowns are counterfeit, right? This is all the last counterfeit kingdom. I tell people get confused when I say, I want a new world order. I want a one world government. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm saying, no, I want Jesus, because this is a counterfeit. We actually do want a new world order with Jesus Christ ruling. We want one leader. We want one dictator, but he's the greatest dictator of all time, right? He'll be the greatest king of all, is Jesus Christ. So this is a counterfeit of that global kingdom, right? It's a counterfeit new world order, the bad version, right? That's what we're learning, because it has blasphemous names on its heads. What's blasphemy? Speaking against God, right? So the beast is going to oppose God openly. He's not going to lie like the politicians today and say, I'm a Bible-believing whatever, I do this, and then you look in, you don't even go to church, they don't do this stuff, or they say they're in this religion or that religion, and they pretend to be okay, even though I'm not a believer, I don't really partake in religions, but what works for you? He's not going to be like that. You're not going to see politicians in the end time like that. They'll just pretty much tell you you're wrong, you're full of lies, they'll chop your head off, throw you in jail. There's not going to be any more tolerance of religions anymore. This is the final days of that. Enjoy the final days of the joy of religion and the freedom, because it's almost over. And when it gets to here, it's completely over. And he's going to be very open, very blasphemous, very anti-God. What does this verse remind us of? That Satan, remember, he's been doing this forever, he still does today, works through earthly kingdoms. Because remember, the dragon he's on the sand. The dragon's the one. Why do you think chapter 12 ends with the dragon huffing and puffing, furious? I just kind of see him as like seething. He's going out to the beach to cool his head because he just couldn't catch that Israel, and he can't get the Jews, and Jesus and the church got away. He can't kill the saints that got away. So he's furious and he's seething, and he's like, it reminds me almost like he's summoning, I'm summoning my final leader, like in those movies they do, and he comes out and he rises out of the sea because he's summoning them, because it's the very end. And he's going to work through this earthly kingdom. And he's down on the earth, by the way. That's why he's going to be furious. And I think this goes hand in hand with that fall to earth. Remember, this Antichrist is peaceful for the first 3.5 years. Now he's going to start to look pretty terrible. He's going to look worse than Hitler, worse than Stalin, worse than anybody you ever heard of. What changed? Well, the timing is no coincidence, I don't think. Satan's here. And he says, we're done being nice. I'm taking over. And he basically grabs the steering wheel and says, we're killing the Jews, we're killing everybody that loves Jesus, we're taking, and things drastically change, which is probably when the abomination of desolation happens. He sits down, he says, I'm God. He starts to sound just like Satan himself, because he's going to be. We're going to find out Satan's going to really be working with him. So Satan is going to be working through these earthly kingdoms. It's going to be a counterfeit, and we also can know this is going to happen in the end through these big leaders, but you do understand, and this says that human government can become demonically corrupted and demonically influenced. It's going to happen here, which means it could have happened in the past and it could be happening presently. But there is demonic influence. When you look at sometimes the law changes and you see the ways the countries are and what they're doing, man, that doesn't make any sense. That seems pretty backwards. It probably is. It's probably demonic, because that can happen, and that's what this says. And the final world system will be the most demonic, the most blasphemous you've ever seen. It's going to be pretty bad. Verse number 2. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon, Satan, gave his power and his throne and great authority. Are you guys still in Daniel chapter 7? I hope you guys still have your finger in Daniel chapter 7. Because look, we got a beast like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's. Its mouth was like a lion's. Remember, if we were just reading Revelation for the first time, we'd say, what is this talking about? But we have the answer. We already know it was Daniel chapter 7. So let's go back to Daniel chapter 7 and look at verse number 6. Because really verses 2 through 7 will deal with this first beast, this leopard. Daniel 7, verse 6. After this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back, and the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. The leopard. Does anybody remember what the leopard stood for? The leopard was Greece. The leopard turned out to be Greece. Remember, Daniel prophesied this. This was still the future. It's history to us. We can look back and go, oh, Alexander the Great. Oh, the four heads at the end. Oh, that's when he died young and they split into the 4 kingdoms. So we can see this. It makes sense to us. But back then, they're like, what is he talking about, right? So this was Greece. Why is he bringing up this leopard? Because we already know that was Greece. Why is he bringing up Greece now, right? Well, the leopard is known for speed, expansion of really cunning intelligence, and that's how Greece was. Alexander the Great, remember, he was a great military, I think in 10 years, think about this, in 10 years in the ancient world, he had like the whole world conquered. And he was actually, if you read about Alexander the Great, he was depressed because he said there was nothing more to conquer. If you look it up, he had nothing else. He conquered it that fast. So that's for the speed. That's why it was like a leopard, right? So the Antichrist kingdom will look a lot like Alexander the Great's. He is going to be a nobody. That's why he's called a little horn, we'll see. He's going to be a nobody. By the way, if you noticed in some of the language here, it said there would be 10 kingdoms, and then all of a sudden another horn would rise up and knock out 3 kings. That's this one. Actually, the kingdoms, the Antichrist does not set up the system. Sometimes we get confused. We think the Antichrist rules and starts establishing his kingdom. No, it's set up. And then he comes up and probably kills 3 of the kings, takes over, and then out of nowhere, he's the number 1 man in the world. Pretty quick ascent, and he's going to take power, and he's going to take over the world quickly, and AI will probably help him do that. Makes sense now how fast it would really happen, or maybe other ways, I don't know, but you can see what's going on and how it'll be rapid expansion. He'll use strategic intelligence like Alexander the Great did. He'll know how to do it. He'll know who to get first and how to do it so he can get everything he needs, right? And it's going to be incredibly fast. In Daniel 8, actually, you can go to the next chapter if you're there. Daniel 8, look at verse number 5. This chapter is all about Greece in detail. Remember, Greece didn't happen yet. Greece was going to come in a little while, the Persians. And it says, as I was considering, this is verse number 5, chapter 8, verse 5 in Daniel. As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. That was, again, talking about Greece. See how it said without touching the ground? It was going to move so fast that its legs aren't even touching. Almost like running so fast, your feet aren't even touching the ground. So you can see, again, everything was going to be rapid. And Daniel is seeing it, of course, as Greece. But remember, the Bible is full of dual fulfillment. And I'll go over that. Maybe I'll do a whole lesson. I keep talking about it. I probably should. On dual fulfillment. Because sometimes we'll get trapped and say, oh, no, that was already fulfilled. Oh, the temple was destroyed in the year 70 and Greece already came. And Antiochus already, and all these things. But it's like, yeah, but this was the smaller version. There's always a bigger final form, right? A bigger and final form. So Greece, we're seeing, was even just a little bit like the Antichrist. He was a little bit to show us what the Antichrist would be like, right? And by the way, we'll find out evil will often advance quickly when people are spiritually asleep. And that's what's going to happen. You're going to just be like, yeah, sure, whatever, right? If you don't have if you can't snuff this out and say, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right, he's just going to be able to get it because nobody's going to be, have any religious whatever, any moral compass. And they're just going to be going with whatever he wants to do, and it's going to be fast. Then it says, after a leopard, its feet were like a bear's. All right, well, Look at verse number 5 of Daniel chapter 7. Daniel 7, verse 5. And behold, another beast, a second one like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And it was told, arise, devour much flesh. A bear. A bear is brutal, crushing power, force, right? If I'm in the woods, I do not run into a bear. I have no chance, no matter what. Not even with a gun sometimes. You don't even really have a chance sometimes, right? So it has a lot of force. And who is this? Well, we know that this was Medo-Persia, the Persians, right? The Medes and the Persians. And they had this force. And if you actually study the Persians, they used brute military force to conquer. Meaning if there was a town of 1,000 troops, they'd send 1,000,000. They would just use brute force. That was their tactic, which would coincide with Persia. And that's exactly how Cyrus and Xerxes, all of them, they got their power through this brute force, and it worked. That's how they did it, like a bear, right? And that's how it's going to be with the Antichrist. He's going to use brute force. He's going to use persecution. He's going to use economic control. He's going to have global military enforcing all around, and it's going to be brutal. And it's going to be with force. And if you oppose him, it's not going to be court cases. It's going to be kill him, crush him. It's going to be violent like it was back in the days of Persia. Because not only is the Antichrist going to be quick like the Alexander the Great, he's going to be brutal like the Persians were when they took over with brute force, right? And you're going to find out human governments, we know this, human governments, apart from God, usually become oppressive with brutal force if you let them. We're starting to see that happen even in our day and age today, right? But that's what will happen because it's not godly power. If you have godly people in power, it's not as oppressive, right? It's not going to be oppressive, but their goal is to have honor and worship and do what they want, right? So they will oppress and do whatever they need. Now look at the other thing. It says, its mouth was like a lion's mouth. Daniel 7, verse 4. Look at the verse before that, Daniel 7, verse 4. If you notice, we've been going backwards in Daniel. We started in Daniel, now we're going backwards up the chapter. I'll get to that here. Daniel 7, verse 4. The lion, the first beast, was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. Now that specifically is probably talking about King Nebuchadnezzar, that little end part there. That'll make a little more sense. When he went crazy and then God had to, show him that he was in charge. That's a little extra details. Probably that's why he's plucked off wings. But it was talking about Babylon, right, in the bigger sense. And how Babylon, right, was like a lion, prideful. Remember Nebuchadnezzar? He had the gold statue, bow to me, right? He was full of himself, bow to me, full of pride. A lion and pride, the mouth, like saying honor me with your mouth. He's using a lot of language here. Pride and authority, and he wants human glory. Not to mention Babylon. Remember, this isn't the first time Babylon showed up. Nebuchadnezzar conquered the Israelites with this, but in Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel is Babylon, remember? So this goes all the way back, and remember then, that was pride. God said, be fruitful, multiply, and Nimrod said, no. I'm going to build my kingdom. I'm going to build Nineveh. I'm going to build Babel. I'm going to build all these cities, and we're going to do what we want, right? It's that human pride. So you can see Babylon's always been tied to that. So what does that mean? Well, of course, we can see here the mouth. He's going to be full of himself. He's going to be arrogant. We already said he's going to be blasphemous, so he's going to be a loudmouth. He's going to talk about how great he is and how much better he is than God, how much better he is than anybody else. He's going to be full of himself. He'll be a narcissist, right? And the mouth part is especially important. Why? Because this is the Antichrist kingdom. It's characterized by speech in general. There's going to be full of blasphemy and deception. There's going to be a lot of lies. It's going to be hard to sift through, especially with AI and all that stuff if it's still around. And propaganda, right? And we know about that today. Actually, propaganda is actually the biggest, it's actually, they say sometimes today, stronger than military force. And you can actually see some of the things you see turning in our country were used through propaganda. All throughout our networks today, there's propaganda everywhere, and you actually have to do your own research. It's exhausting. I do it. It's exhausting to sift through. It's going to be worse, and you won't even be able to find the truth later on, right? So he's going to be using that speech to lie and make it look like whatever he's saying is true, and it's going to all be false, right? So it talked about this, Daniel 7. Remember verse 25 at the end, it said, he shall speak words against the Most High and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. And he even says, shall think to change the times of the law. He wants to get everything again away from the Jews, very similar to Constantine did in the past. But you can see he's full. So what's really interesting here is we have these kingdoms, which, by the way, Hosea, a lot of people don't know Hosea even prophesied this. Go to Hosea quick. So we don't actually we'll take time to look at this because we don't usually see this. Hosea chapter 13. Look at even Hosea got a little bit of a glimpse of what Daniel saw. Then I'll talk about these kingdoms and some interesting things here. Hosea chapter 13, the minor prophets. So if you're in Daniel, a couple books later. Hosea chapter 13. And then look at verse number 5. Hosea 13, verse 5. Look what it says. It was I who knew you in the wilderness, in the land of drought. But when they had grazed, they became full, they were filled, and their heart was lifted up. Therefore, they forgot me. So God here is talking in the wilderness. Who is this? This is Israel. Hey, you were in the wilderness, you guys forgot me. He's talking about the Israelites. Hey, I saved you guys, and you forgot me. So what does he say after that? So I am to them like a lion. Like a leopard, I will lurk beside the way. I will fall upon them like a bear robbed of her cubs. I will tear open their breast, and there I will devour them like a lion, as a wild beast would rip them open. What is God saying in Hosea? What was that prophecy about? Well, Israel, you didn't obey, you forgot about me. You know how I'm going to get your attention? I'm going to send these wild beasts, and just happens to be leopard, bear, lion. Is that a coincidence? No. Again, Hosea maybe probably saw. I'm sure there were leopards and bears that came out and killed unruly, disobedient Israelites. That probably happened for real, right? But what was God talking about? He was talking about this. In the end, why are the Jews going through such a terrible time? Why is it the time of Jacob's trouble? Because they didn't listen. If they would have accepted Jesus when he rode in on the donkey, none of this would happen. Did you know that? Did you know this is happening because they rejected Jesus when he rode in as the king and they didn't accept him? This is why all this is happening. This is why the 70th week of Daniel is happening. And Hosea said that God was going to do this. And Daniel said that God was going to do this and use a kingdom that operated like all the other kingdoms of the world. That's what it's saying. So we saw here, leopard is Greece, right? Then you had Persia with the bear and Babylon with the lion. But remember, that's backward. Because Daniel saw, that's why we were going backwards in Daniel chapter 7, because Daniel saw Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. Why? Because that was the order his timeline was going. But now where's John at? Think about this. Where's John? He's in Revelation. He's way ahead. Now to look, he has to look this way. And first you would see, after Rome, Greece, right? Then Persia, and then Babylon would be the furthest away. It's the reverse order because now we're at the other side of time. We're looking backwards at history. Daniel was looking forward. Now we're looking backward. Right? So but did you notice one empire that wasn't named? There's actually, remember, there's 4 beasts in Daniel's thing, and we only see 3 of them here. Babylon, Persia, and Greece. Does anybody remember the 4th kingdom here that wasn't named yet on any of this? It is Rome. Rome wasn't. Why did he say the Antichrist was going to be like Alexander the Great? He's going to be like the Persians. He's going to be like Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians. Why didn't he say he's going to be like Caesar Augustus? Why didn't he say something about that? Because the whole chapter's about that. Because this is Rome. That's why. He doesn't have to say it's going to be like Rome. It is Rome. Rome resurrected back from the dead, and even worse. It'll have a bigger, so you already know it's going to be like Rome because it's mainly modeled after Rome. It just also happens to look exactly like Greece. It has all these other, it's basically like, it reminds me when I used to watch, when I was a kid, there was a show, Power Rangers. They probably still have it. It's probably just different now. But at the end, they would all kind of join together. And they would all, they were all these Power Rangers fight, but at the end they had to fight this big giant thing. So then all of a sudden, somehow their ships would come together, they'd morph and create this giant beast. And then it was all their powers combined. That's kind of what this is, but from the worst sense. All the worst of Alexander the Great, all the worst things of Nebuchadnezzar, it's all going to be within this Antichrist. It's going to be all the worst. Babylon's pride, Persia's force, Greece's speed, and Rome's global domination, right? That's where they're going to be. Rome is going to be very globally dominant. And the key part of this verse here, and the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority to it. The dragon did. So remember, again, not coming from the Antichrist. This is coming from the dragon. This is coming from Satan, right? Which we already saw last chapter 12. It is Satan, right? So behind the Antichrist kingdom stands satanic power. This is coincides with Ephesians chapter 6. All spiritual forces of evil are behind. That's our true enemies, right? And Daniel chapter 10. We've read about that earlier where the spiritual powers are influencing earthly kingdoms. Remember the Prince of Persia? There was that angelic war, that little battle anyway, so Daniel could get that vision. So we see here that this whole time, you could say, you could look at this, it's almost like a Sixth Sense moment. If you haven't had one yet, like in the movie when you see it and the whole time, you realize you look backwards and everything makes sense. That's kind of how it is now. You look at this and you're like, wait, Satan is running this. It's not really the Antichrist. Satan's behind it. And then you can look backwards and go, wait a minute. Alexander the Great wasn't really running it. Satan was running it. Nebuchadnezzar was never really running it. Pharaoh was never really running Egypt. It was always Satan. So it's almost like this epiphany. The whole time Satan's been running all 7 of those kingdoms. That's why the dragon had 7 heads. It was all him. It wasn't 7 different things, right? Just like how we have God as 3 in 1, Satan somehow in a way 7 in 1, if you count all of his kingdoms. It looked like 7 kingdoms. It was all Satan's earthly kingdom, because who's the God of this world? It's him. And he's been proving it since the beginning of time. We're just now very openly being told it was him the whole time. He's been given his power. He has all the magical authority that he's been doing, the deception, the lies, the propaganda. He's the propaganda machine. He's the one getting people to hate people and get people all wound up so he can move things around, because he's going to create, Satan's going to create the system, and then the Antichrist, remember, will rise up later. That's why he's a little horn. I don't even think you can predict I don't think you even know who he is today. And you couldn't, because the system's going to come out. He's not even going to be one of the kings they install. He's going to come up later. So it's so hidden, I don't even think you could predict him, even if he's alive today, which he is probably alive, but we don't know, right? And you see that language is throne. So what's interesting here is he offers him his throne again. That's kingdom language. So Satan is offering a throne to the Antichrist. That's probably how it happens all the time, right? He offers, hey, do you want this power? It's the deal with the devil. It's the archetypical deal with the devil. These are the real ones, right? Maybe the music guitar players, maybe they sold their soul, I don't know. But this stuff really happens, where the leaders make deals with the devil and they get empowered by him. The Bible is just full of it. So it has to be real, right? And Satan's done this before. Go to Matthew chapter 4. This is actually his MO. You're going to find out he's been doing this forever. He does it to everybody he thinks he can get to worship in and give him authority, right? Because he's the God of this world. Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4. And go to verse number 8. Matthew chapter 4, verse number 8. Again, this is talking about Jesus and the devil, right? The devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him, that's Jesus, showed Jesus all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, Satan saying this to Jesus, all these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. Then Jesus said to him, begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and were ministering to him. So, the beast did the same thing to Jesus. He said, hey, I'll give you my throne. I'll give you a whole worldly kingdom. You can run the whole world if you just worship me. That's what he wants. And guess what? Jesus said no. I bet the same conversation happened with the devil. There's a chance the devil takes the Antichrist, whoever he is, out on the hill and says, I'll give you all these. And he says, it's a deal. And he shakes his hand and he says, yes. That's the difference between the beast. The lamb rejected it, said no. Jesus said, no, not doing that. Why did Jesus say no? Oh, because they're his anyway, right? It's kind of like, you know what I mean? If you're like, you're doing your chores. I'm going to use an example. You're a kid and you're doing chores and mom says she'll give you $5 to clean your room. And then somebody goes, you're cleaning the room and you're almost done. And somebody goes, hey, I'll give you $5 if you don't do it. It's like, no, I'm on my way. I don't need your help. I don't need your assistance to get what I'm already working on. Jesus is already working on the kingdom, and Satan saw. He's like, well, I'll give it to you. He's like, I don't need you to give it to me. I'm going to take it from you, right? But Satan offers people. He's probably done this over and over. Jesus even got the deal offer. Jesus got a deal with the devil offer, and he said no, like we should, right? But the beast said yes, and the beast becomes Satan's counterfeit Messiah. That's what's going to happen, right? And now we're going to see the counterfeit trinity really come into play that I talk about a lot. We have the dragon, Satan, the counterfeit father, right? We have the beast. He's going to be the counterfeit son, like Jesus Christ. And then the false prophet, we'll get to him, the other beast. By the way, this is one of two beasts. This is the beast that rises out of the sea. When we get to the end of the chapter later, we're going to see there's a beast that rises out of the earth, remember? So there's actually two beasts. This is the first one that we're going to be reading about, right? And had his great authority. So Satan's going to just keep counterfeiting God, right? Let's do another verse. Here, let's see, chapter 13, verse 3. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. So one of its heads, what it's talking about. Remember, this beast looks just like the dragon. Remember, it has 7 heads. And remember, the 7 heads were these kingdoms. Like I said, most likely represents from Egypt all the way through, and we're at the 7th kingdom. Remember, there's 6 kingdoms. Rome was the 6th one. Rome 2.0 here is the 7th one, right? That's why one of its heads, which one? The one that's dealing with the Antichrist, because the other 6 heads are gone in the past. They're gone. So this head, so one of its heads, which will be the Antichrist, pointing to a specific ruler, seemed to have a mortal wound. All right, mortal wound literally means like a death blow or a fatal strike, like a shot in the head, or somebody slits his throat up and whatever it might be. And we have some ideas, but it appears catastrophic, right? Look at the words seemed. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound. Again, language is so important. If it said one of its head had a mortal wound, but it's mortal wound. That would be very different than one that seemed to, right? It's like parlor tricks. Think about parlor tricks. Parlor tricks is, do we say, hey, the magician pulled a rabbit out of his hat? No, we say, the magician seemed to have pulled a rabbit out of his hat, right? And there's all these other things. He seemed to pull out a bouquet out of thin air. It seemed like that, but that was not the reality, right? There is real magic. Remember, there is real magic you don't mess with. But the magicians that do all these tricks, that's illusion. Those are illusions. They're seeming to do things they're not actually doing, which sounds a lot like what we're going to see here. Now, there is debate, right? There's going to be debate over this. Is he really going to be killed or not? Because it's a mortal blow. This is like an assassination. Basically, what we see here, just like we would imagine, if the Antichrist rose in our day, somebody we know would say, I'm going to go kill him. I'm taking him out. He hates God. I'm 2-1 for the team. And there's going to be people like that, and they're going to try it, and they're going to succeed, but not really, is what we're learning at. But does he really get killed or not? I think it says seemed, so I don't think he really does die. It's going to look like it. We say he resurrected, but the word seemed there. Plus, because if he could raise, that means Satan could raise people from the dead at any time. But Satan does not have the power to raise people from the dead. Only God does. Now, could he die and come back to life? Yes, there is a chance. But only under God, only if God is choosing to do this. If only God would allow them to be deceived that he would take them from the dead and allow them to do a full resurrection. But what this is getting at here is there's a few interpretations. One, like I said, a literal assassination, which I believe this is what it's getting at, right? It could also be, which would also work, a revived empire. Some people believe that this is talking about the empire of Rome that looked like it was dead. It's been gone since, the time of the Bible almost, and maybe a couple hundred years after, I guess, and now it's back, right? It could mean that too. Remember, the Bible can mean multiple things at once. That the empire is revived, but he's going to be, I think, shot and killed or stabbed and killed, and he's going to come back from the dead, right? But the whole thing is to show that he is a counterfeit. Remember the lamb and the beast counterfeit? The beast is the counterfeit of the lamb. We're seeing that here because look what it says. Its mortal wound was healed. So suddenly imagine you see somebody shot dead and they're in the streets, right? They're laying there dead and it could be a long time. And maybe they even have them, in the hearse or something like that. And then all of a sudden the person sits up and gets up. And this is their leader. That, by the way, remember the people loved this guy because he got the people to chill out and just make peace with Israel. And he got sick. He was able to make peace in the Middle East. This is their guy. And now somebody killed him. They were probably mourning all so sad that he died. And now he's back from the dead. And now nobody can believe it, right? The people, their minds are blown, right? The whole earth marveled, just like we would. Anybody that dies, lays down, something so catastrophic that anybody would die, and then they get back up. Anybody would marvel, like, what is something magical, something special is going on here. It's satanic power, right? Go to Zechariah chapter 11. He's near the end of the minor prophets. This is really interesting. As I was reading this week, this jumped out to me. We might even have a hint of how he gets assassinated or attempted. Zechariah chapter 11, verse 15. This is really interesting. Now, I might not be 100% correct, but it seems to line up. It seems to make sense. And there's a lot of things that'll make sense to you soon, maybe. Zechariah 11, verse 15. Remember, Zechariah is like Daniel. Daniel and Zechariah are end times. They see a lot of end timesy stuff. Zechariah sees it. And verse 15, Zechariah 11, verse 15. Then the Lord said to me, take once more the equipment of a foolish shepherd. For behold, I am raising up in the land a shepherd who does not care for those being destroyed, or seek the young, or heal the maimed, or nourish the healthy, but devours the flesh of the fat ones, tearing off even their hooves. Woe to my worthless shepherd who deserts the flock. Who's he talking about? Zechariah's seen the end times. Woe to this guy. He's going to be a shepherd. He's not even going to care. He's going to kill me. He doesn't even care. He cares about himself. So what does it say? Look at, woe to my worthless shepherd who deserts the flock. May the sword strike his arm and his right eye. That's interesting. Let his arm be wholly withered, his right eye utterly blinded. Have you ever seen people that now this is, maybe or maybe not, maybe this is where this comes from. This belief is that when something happened to his arm, is he crushed? Is he killed? Is he shot? Is he run over by a truck that his arm gets crushed and his eye? Seems like something goes on with his arm. And he's probably going to walk around just like, how we see in the Bible at the end of time that we'll probably still be able to see Jesus' scars forever and what he did for us. Some people say we'll be able to see we'll be able to remember what he did for us and he'll carry that in. Some people believe this is the Antichrist doing that mockery. He's going to walk around ruling Satan. Remember, Satan's going to indwell him. Satan's going to basically possess him. We're going to get to that here. And that's why he becomes evil and satanic all rapidly, right? But he's probably going to walk around with his wounds. He's probably going to have a patch on his eye, or, you know what I mean, covers up his eye. By the way, did you ever think about this? Isn't this interesting that if you got shot in the right eye and you covered an eye, you do this? So sometimes there's people in the occult that will walk around and cover their right eye like this, and it very well could possibly be associated with the worship of the beast and the worship of Satan, right? But here's where we get the idea that he actually might be shot, or something happens with we see here, with his right eye, and it's talking about this terrible shepherd. Zechariah is seeing the end times. We believe he's talking about the Antichrist here, but it says the whole earth marveled, right? Revelation is repeatedly going to show that these deceptive signs are going to get people to marvel. Deceptive signs can get people to be amazed. Just like I said, at a magic, isn't it funny? We go to a magic show and we know there's no rabbit magic things and flowers, but we're still amazed every time it happens, right? We're still marveling, how did he do that? That was great, and I love it. It's funny to see, it's cool to see, right? So they're going to be amazed and marveled in Daniel chapter 8. If you're still in Daniel, if not, that's okay. You can hang it and just listen to me read it. Daniel chapter 8, again, is talking about this deceptive leader, how he's going to deceive people even with a false resurrection. It's all a counterfeit. He's going to use this. This is going to be another version of his deception. Daniel 8, verse 24. His power shall be great, not by his own power. This is him. And he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. And look at this. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and his own mind shall become great. And without warning he'll destroy many. So by his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand. He has this idea, listen, we're going to counterfeit, we're going to fake this thing. For all we know, it's like Satan sets us up. For all we know, Satan has no person. Maybe it's not even a person that's a Christian that tries to kill him. Maybe it's a whole setup to do this whole play. To get people, by the way, that stuff, you can look into it, probably still goes on today. There's political plays that happen on the news and you don't know about it. That's possibly going to happen at the end, right? It's going to be a play. And people are going to believe the play. They're going to believe the propaganda that this guy died and came back. And who wouldn't? Who wouldn't want to follow a guy I follow a guy that was dead and got back, right? That's Jesus. He's the only one that did it. This is a lie. This is deception. This is a counterfeit. And Daniel told us he's going to use a lot of deception. I talk about the alien stuff. Yeah, that will be deceptive and probably explain away the rapture stuff. But this is really some of the greatest deception. He's going to try to be like Christ. He's mocking Christ. I wouldn't be surprised if he lays dead for 3 days. I wouldn't be surprised. And that would be more mesmerizing, wouldn't it? See somebody get shot in the street, get up, or see somebody shot dead, and for 3 days, like I said, maybe driven in the hearse, who knows, and gets out. It's going to be a lot of deception. And of course, it says the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast, right? They're so amazed that they actually start following the beast, right? Even though how evil he's going to be and all the evil things he's going to say, they're just going to believe him. He's so powerful, right? Which again, this is a reminder that humanity is easily captivated by power and spectacles, right? That's why somebody says, you should see this thing. Like, sometimes God can perform miracles today. That can still happen. There's also witchcraft that can still happen, right? I know people. I've talked to people that got out of witchcraft, and when I was meeting with them, they were telling me the things they saw, and it was pretty spectacular. And by the way, the guy told me that's what got him in. He went to some ritual, some occult ritual, up in northern Pennsylvania, and they did the magical things, like trees raining, and people walking but floating without having to touch the ground, levitation. And when he saw this, imagine you have no religious background, really, or you really didn't take it seriously. You don't really follow God, and then you see this stuff happen, and somebody's telling you you can do anything you want. You can manifest reality. It's all a dream. You can do whatever you want. And he's seeing these things happen. It got him wrapped up in it because humanity can be deceived because it is pretty amazing, some of the things they can do, but it's evil, right? It's only amazing if it's God doing the miracle. If not, it's witchcraft, right? And that stuff goes on today. That was only a few years ago. I talked to that guy. So what it means is if somebody comes down the street and says somebody did a miracle and you find out they're not from Christ and they do Ouija board stuff, it might be real. They might have done some weird thing to deceive, because Satan loves to deceive, and humans are easily deceived with miraculous signs, right? Again, so it's more proof. Miraculous signs do not always prove that it's divine. There's divine truth. It also shows that believers must guard against cultural fascination. And this is important in our day. Think about this. What did they do? They saw this happen. They marveled. They were amazed. So amazed, they followed it. I'm going to buy a shirt. I'm going to buy a shirt. I'm going to buy a hat with this guy on it. I'm going all in, right? This is no longer a political figure, right? This is no longer a president or a king. This is now a religious figure. This is going to get worship, right? People pledge support to politicians. Sometimes they worship them. That's bad, right? But this guy is going to get real worship. right? He's going to go from politician to a religious figure because of this. So guard against culture, guard against what fascinates the crowd and the culture, right? If something's fascinating, be careful, because people might get obsessed with it. And if you're not careful, they'll say, look, check this out. And it's some worldly stuff you don't want to get involved in, and it sucks up all your time, and you start buying all these things. It can happen with music. Like, that's why I'm a music fan, and I'm very careful even with the concerts. I always remember that person's on stage, but they're just a musician. And some of these people, it's seriously, you got to be careful at concerts. It can feel like a worship service, right? Except that they act like Jesus is on stage, but he's not, right? You can get caught up, athletes. I know people that, like, they said they would, maybe pass out if they saw their favorite athlete. That's crazy. That's almost a version of worship, right? You shouldn't do that with humans, right? That's pretty wild. So that can happen. This is a sign. Careful about what you marvel at. There are amazing things in the world, but be careful that you don't get so obsessed that you don't start worshiping about how amazing these things are, right? And it shows that that can happen. But what we're getting at, this is probably just my last verse because we're running out of time, is you can see again the contrast with these 3 verses we did between the Lamb and the Beast. The Lamb, Jesus Christ, truly died, truly rose from the dead, and truly will bring salvation to his people. He will take care of his people, right? The beast appears mortally, it appears to die, appears to be resurrected, and leads the world into deception to think that he is going to be their great leader, which the Bible says he has no interest for them, right? That's what we saw there. And that's how verse 3 ends. We'll just stop there because we're running out of time. Does anybody have any questions, any comments, or any thoughts based on those first couple verses there, or anything you thought of? Yeah, Paul.
Did all the Jews have to believe in Jesus, or could it have taken one for this not to happen?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I think so that's a great question. Paul's saying, if there were like one person in that crowd that said, no, guys, you're wrong. Jesus is the Messiah. I read Daniel. This is him. Would that have saved Israel? I don't think so, because there actually might have been somebody like that there, and they would have been blessed for knowing it. But it's a corporate back, and especially in the Old Testament, things are very corporate. Not till the New Testament, Jesus changes everything. He says, forget about corporate national. Worry about you. Fix you. Then fix everything around you. But very Old Testament was very national Israel. And then the end, it talks very national. So I would have imagined it would have been the whole nation. That crowd would have cheered for Jesus as king. And there might have been a few in the crowd that were called insane. Just like the rapture, and we're called kind of crazy when we point at the rapture. They say, it's not written in there. It's not in there. And even if you're one of the few people, you could be right. Because there could be people back then saying, hey, this is our Messiah. And they'd say, no. I don't see a secret first coming. I've never seen a secret, and you can't prove a secret first coming. There's only one. He comes and he rules forever. And we'd say, no. This happens, and then this happens. And you would have got mocked back then. They literally would have mocked you after when he went. They would have said, this is not. He's getting killed. It's not our king. So I think it would have taken all the Jews, right? And the Jews do have to believe. There are some people who get so hyper into Israel. They say Israel's saved just by being Israel. That is not true. That's why all the Jews today are in trouble that don't believe. But in the end, the Jews are going to see this, right? And they know the scriptures, and the eyes are going to be open. They will no longer be blinded. Where almost all the Jews, and when we say all the Jews will be saved, all of Israel will be saved, in the end, essentially, because the other ones that don't believe will end up being, they'll be worshiping the mark of the beast and they'll be killed. They're not considered that, right? They'll be taken care of. By the end, if the Jews haven't defected to the mark of the beast, all the rest of them will be saved. It's kind of how that language probably works out. But that's a great question. There probably were, I think, I was actually talking about that a couple weeks ago. I said, how many people, just like, sometimes we get mocked, like I said, for the rapture, and people say it wasn't in there. How many people back then maybe got it right? I said, this is the Messiah, and they got mocked, said, that's not in the Bible. I never saw that in there. Right? So that's why I never let people tell me what they see and what they don't see in the Bible, because I've read the Bible, and the Lord can show us things, and there's things people miss the first time. That means people are going to miss them the second time, right? The pattern. Nobody's going to get this. That's why all the end time stuff's all over the place, right? Because a lot of people are going to get a lot of things wrong. We might even get certain details wrong, right? But because there's going to be so many things that people got wrong the first time that will probably get wrong the second time. But we can learn from the old patterns that there was this sequence. We can learn the second time will be very similar. That's why I think the rapture is very possible. It makes sense because God's first coming, Jesus' first coming, came in these sequences, not as one actual event. So the pattern is actually on the side of a rapture. But again, no matter what you believe in the end times, as long as you believe in Christ, it doesn't matter. But I love to think about these things. That was a great question,
So
Paul.
one could spoil the whole.
One could spoil the whole bunch, according to the language of the Lord. I don't know if he'd end up doing like that. I don't know if he's so. Could you imagine if God let all of Israel, except a few people, nope, doesn't count.
reminds me of when God was going to destroy Sodom and
Gomorrah.
30, 50,
Yep.
20.
Well, that's fair. And it's funny if you, and there is, I mean, there's also the good chance people think that nobody believed that Jesus is Messiah. And that's probably closer to the truth. There might have been nobody in the crowd that believed. And again, if you think about it, because he's saying how like, remember it's like Abraham's like, well, if there's like 10 righteous people, if there's just 5, he's like, yep, I'd do it. If there's just 5. So perhaps it could have been the same. But what if just 10 people believe? Yep, if 10 people believe, I won't send the tribulation. What if 5 people? Yep, I won't send the Antichrist. You just believe. What if 1? So who knows? There probably wasn't many, if there were any that believed. So, and that is, again, why is the time of Jacob's trouble. They aren't getting punished for their unbelief, but it's to wake them up. Not to, wipe them out, but to wake them up. There will be Jews. By the way, let me clarify again. There will be Jews from Israel that will fold. When the Antichrist takes over, they will not flee, and they'll just get the mark. And they'll just give in. Those will not be saved. Those Jews will be earth dwellers then. So that is a key difference. When it talks about the Jews being saved at the end, they reject the Antichrist. There will be Jews that accept him. They are not included in the salvation, right, of Jesus Christ. So just to clarify that. Any other question or comments? That was a really good one, Paul. Anybody else? All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Keep reading ahead. We're going to keep in chapter 13, learning more about the Antichrist, and eventually we'll get to the false prophet. But keep reading until next time. I'll see you. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning.